A starving widow stood at a stranger's door with 5 dying children and spoke words that would break any heart. "Take my children before they die." The poor rancher who answered could have turned them away. He had nothing but grief and empty pockets. Instead, he said 4 words that changed 6 lives forever. "I'll take you too." This is the story of how 2 broken souls and 5 forgotten children became a family when the whole world said it was impossible. Stay until the end and comment what city you're watching from, so I can see how far this story travels. The Montana dawn came cold and merciless, the kind of morning that reminded a man he was alone. Calder Briggs woke to darkness in his one-room cabin, the same way he'd woken every day for the past 2 years, with the ghost of his wife's voice still echoing in the silence, with his daughter's empty cradle gathering dust in the corner he couldn't bear to look at. He was 34 years old and felt like 60. The ranch that had once held his dreams now felt like a prison of memories. Every fence post he'd built with Hannah's encouragement, every window she'd hung curtains in, every patch of earth where little Marie had toddled after chickens, laughing that bright bell-clear laugh that still woke him from sleep sometimes. They'd been gone 26 months. Fever had taken them both within a week of each other, leaving Calder with nothing but a double grave on the hillside and a silence so heavy it had weight. He pulled on his boots in the dark, not bothering to light the lamp. What was the point? There was no one to see by, no one to cook for, no reason to make the cabin warm or bright or welcoming. He'd learned to move through his morning routine like a ghost, feed the animals, check the fences, haul water from the creek, choke down whatever cold food was left from the night before. The knock came just as the first gray light touched his window. It was so faint he almost missed it, a soft, desperate scratching sound like a wounded animal trying to get in from the cold. Calder froze, one hand on his coffee pot. Nobody came out this far. His nearest neighbor was 6 miles south, and they hadn't spoken in over a year. The town was 12 miles east, and he only went there when supplies ran so low he had no choice. The knock came again, weaker this time. He crossed to the door in 3 long strides and pulled it open, his hand instinctively moving to the rifle he kept propped beside the frame. What he saw made his breath catch in his throat. A woman stood on his porch, if you could call it standing. She was swaying on her feet, one hand braced against the doorframe, the other clutching a bundle wrapped in torn blankets. Her dress was little more than rags held together with hope and thread. Her feet were bare, bleeding from walking on hard Montana ground. Her face was so thin he could see the shape of her skull beneath her skin, and her eyes. God, her eyes were the eyes of someone who'd already died but whose body hadn't figured it out yet. Behind her, 4 children huddled together like a pile of abandoned puppies. The oldest couldn't have been more than 8, the youngest barely walking. They were silent in that terrible way hungry children learn to be silent, past crying, past complaining, past everything but the animal instinct to stay close to their mother. "Please," the woman whispered, her voice cracked on the word. "Please, sir, I'm begging you." Calder's hands tightened on the rifle, but not from threat. From shock, from the sudden visceral memory of his own wife begging the doctor to save their daughter, from the recognition of desperation so pure it had become the only thing left inside a human soul. "Ma'am," he managed, "what?" "Take my children." She said it flat, matter of fact, as if she were asking him to hold her parcels while she tied her shoe. "Take them before they die. I don't have any money. I don't have anything to give you. But take them, please. They're good children. They won't be trouble. Just don't let them starve." The bundle in her arms shifted, and Calder saw a tiny face emerge from the blankets. A baby, maybe 4 months old, its skin hot and flushed with fever. The woman's grip tightened instinctively, and he saw her whole body tremble with the effort of staying upright. "How long since you've eaten?" The question came out harder than he meant it to. "I don't remember." She wavered on her feet. 3 days. Maybe 4. The children had the last of the cornmeal yesterday morning. There's nothing left. One of the children behind her, a little girl with tangled brown hair and huge dark eyes, took a step forward. "Mama's been giving us her share," she said quietly. "She hasn't eaten in longer than 3 days. She's lying." "Lydia." The woman's voice cracked with warning, but there was no strength behind it. The little girl ignored her. She looked straight at Calder with a directness that was almost adult. "Our daddy died in the mine collapse 4 months ago. We lost our house. We've been walking for 2 weeks trying to find work or family or anybody who'd help. We have nobody. Mama can't walk much farther. Neither can Ruth. That's the baby. She's sick." "Lydia, stop." The woman's knees buckled. She caught herself on the doorframe, and the baby in her arms let out a thin, reedy cry that sounded more like a dying bird than a human child. Calder moved without thinking. He caught the woman's elbow before she fell, steadying her with one hand while his mind raced to catch up with what he was seeing. 5 children, a widow, starving, sick, desperate enough to offer her own children to a stranger. "I'll work," the woman said, her words tumbling over each other now. "I can cook. I can clean. I can mend and sew and work a garden. I won't ask for wages, just food for the children, just enough to keep them alive. And when they're strong enough, I'll take them and go. I swear it. I won't be a burden. Just please, please don't turn us away." She lifted her face to his, and Calder saw tears cutting clean tracks through the dirt on her cheeks. "I'm begging you," she whispered. "If you have any mercy in your heart, if you've ever loved anyone, if you know what it is to watch your own child suffer and not be able to help." Her voice broke completely. She lowered her head, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. And something inside Calder Briggs, something he thought had died and been buried with Hannah and Marie, cracked open like a seed in frozen ground. He looked at the children, really looked at them. The oldest girl, Lydia, stood with her chin up and her spine straight despite the exhaustion in her eyes, protecting her siblings even while she could barely stand. Behind her were twin boys, maybe 5 years old, holding hands and watching him with identical expressions of wary hope. A toddler clung to Lydia's skirt, thumb in her mouth, too young to understand but old enough to be afraid. And in their mother's arms, the baby burned with fever, her little chest rising and falling too fast, too shallow. His daughter would have been 3 years old by now. "What's your name?" he asked quietly. The woman raised her head slowly, as if she couldn't quite believe he was still talking to her. "Marin," she whispered. "Marin Calhoun. These are my children. Lydia, Stan, Bo, June, and Ruth." "How old?" "Lydia is 8. The twins are 5. June is 2. Ruth is 4 months." Marin's voice steadied slightly, as if speaking their names gave her strength. "They're good children, Mr. Briggs, Calder Briggs." He looked down at the baby in her arms, seeing the flush of fever, the 2 bright eyes. "The baby needs medicine." "I know." Marin's face crumpled. "I know, but I can't afford. I have some left from when my—" Calder stopped, swallowed hard. "From before. It might help. Come inside." Marin stared at him. "You're letting us in?" "Unless you plan to stand on my porch until you collapse." He stepped back, pulling the door wider. "All of you, inside, now." For a moment, nobody moved. The children looked at their mother. Marin looked at Calder as if he might be a mirage that would disappear if she blinked. "I mean it," Calder said, and his voice came out rougher than he intended. "Get in here before you freeze." Lydia moved first, ushering her siblings forward with the practiced efficiency of a child who'd been parentified too young. The twins darted past Calder like nervous rabbits. June clung to Lydia's hand and stared up at him with enormous eyes. Marin came last, moving slowly, every step an act of will. Calder closed the door behind them and turned to survey his suddenly crowded cabin. 6 people. 6 living, breathing, desperate people, where this morning there had been only one ghost of a man. The children huddled together near the cold fireplace, silent and watchful. Marin stood in the middle of the room with the baby in her arms, swaying slightly, her eyes darting around as if cataloging escape routes. "Sit," Calder said, gesturing to the chair by the table, the only chair he owned. When Marin didn't move, he added more gently, "Please, before you fall down." She sank into the chair with a small, helpless sound, as if her legs had been waiting for permission to give out. The baby whimpered against her chest. Calder moved to the shelf above his dry sink and pulled down the small brown bottle he hadn't been able to throw away. Willow bark extract. The doctor had left it when Marie was dying. It hadn't been enough to save her, but it might bring down this baby's fever. He brought it to Marin along with a clean cloth and his water dipper. Mix a few drops in water, not too much. She's small. Should help with the fever. Marin's hand shook as she took the bottle. I can't pay you for this. Didn't ask you to. Calder turned away before she could argue, focusing on the children instead. They were watching him with the wary intensity of wild animals, ready to bolt if he made a wrong move, but too desperate to run. The cabin had gone 26 months without children's voices. Now it was full of them. Or it would be, once they decided he wasn't a threat. You kids hungry? He asked. Four heads nodded in unison. Even the toddler, June, nodded, though Calder doubted she understood the question. She just knew the answer was supposed to be yes. He went to his larder, such as it was, a half sack of cornmeal, some dried beans, a few strips of jerky, 3 eggs from this morning's collection, a jar of preserves Hannah had put up 3 summers ago that he hadn't been able to open because it still smelled like her hands. It was meant to last him a week, maybe more if he was careful. He pulled it all out and set it on the table. Marin's eyes widened. Mr. Briggs, no, that's your food. We can't, You can and you will. He was already mixing cornmeal and water, his hands remembering the motions from years of cooking breakfast for Hannah. When did these kids last have a hot meal? Marin's silence was answer enough. Calder built up the fire in the stove, heated his cast iron skillet, and started cooking. Johnny cakes first. Quick, filling, easy on starving stomachs. While they cooked, he scrambled the eggs and fried the jerky until the cabin filled with the smell of food. Behind him, he heard one of the twins whimper. Then Lydia's voice, very soft. Quiet, Stan. Don't be rude. But I'm hungry, the boy whispered back. I know, we all are. Just wait. Calder's jaw tightened. He flipped the Johnny cakes with more force than necessary, his mind racing. What the hell was he doing? He had barely enough food for himself. Winter was coming. His taxes were overdue. The ranch was falling apart because he couldn't bring himself to care about fixing it. And now he had 5 starving children and a widow who looked like she'd blow away in a stiff wind. This was insane. This was impossible. He looked over his shoulder at them. Lydia had her arms around the twins, holding them close. June had crawled into Marin's lap beside the baby. They were all watching the stove with the kind of desperate hope that came from not knowing if this meal would be their last. His daughter used to watch him cook like that, dancing around his feet and begging for tastes. It's ready, Calder said roughly. He piled food onto plates, his only 2 plates plus a couple of clean boards from his workbench. He gave the largest portions to the children, smaller ones to Marin, and kept almost nothing for himself. Mr. Briggs, you need to eat too, Marin started. I'll eat later. Feed your kids. For a moment, Marin just stared at the plate in her hands, as if she couldn't quite believe it was real. Then her face crumpled, and she ducked her head, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Mama? Lydia's voice was frightened. Mama, what's wrong? Nothing, baby. Marin's voice was thick. Nothing's wrong. Eat your breakfast. Go on. The children needed no further encouragement. They fell on the food like wolves, shoving Johnny cakes into their mouths with both hands, not bothering with manners or caution. Calder watched the twins nearly choke in their haste and had to physically slow them down. Easy, he said, crouching beside them. Easy, boys. There's enough. You don't have to rush. Stan, or maybe it was Bo, he couldn't tell them apart yet, looked up at him with egg smeared across his face. Is there really enough? The question hit Calder like a fist to the chest. He forced his voice steady. Yeah, there's enough, I promise. It was a lie. He knew it was a lie, but the relief in that little boy's eyes made it worth telling. Marin managed to get a few drops of medicine into Ruth's mouth between bites of her own food. The baby fought it, crying weakly, but Marin persisted with the grim determination of a mother who'd already lost too much. She needs a doctor, Calder said quietly. I know. Marin didn't look up from the baby. I know she does. Town's 12 miles east. Doc Henderson keeps an office above the general store. I can't afford... Didn't ask if you could afford it. Asked if she needs it. Calder stood up, brushing cornmeal off his hands. I'll ride in this afternoon. Bring him back. Marin's head snapped up. You'd do that? For us? Why? It was a fair question. Calder didn't have a good answer. Or maybe he had too many answers and didn't know which one was true. Because he'd watched his own child die and couldn't save her. Because these kids reminded him what his cabin used to sound like when it was full of life. Because this woman had stood on his porch and offered to give up her children rather than watch them suffer. Because he was so goddamn tired of being alone. Because it's the right thing to do, he said finally. It wasn't the whole truth, but it was true enough. Marin's eyes filled with tears again. I don't know how to thank you. Don't thank me yet. Calder turned away, uncomfortable with her gratitude. Baby might not make it. Medicine might not work. And I'm not running a charity here. You said you could work. I'm going to hold you to that. Yes. Marin straightened in her chair, and some steel came into her voice. Yes, of course. I'll earn our keep, Mr. Briggs. I promise you that. I can start today. You can start by not falling over. Calder gestured to the back corner of the cabin, where his bed stood neatly made, the same bed he'd shared with Hannah that he now couldn't bring himself to sleep in. You and the baby take the bed. The little ones can share pallets on the floor. I'll make do with the chair. I can't take your bed. You can and you will. His tone left no room for argument. You're dead on your feet and that baby needs rest more than medicine. I'm not arguing about this. Marin opened her mouth to protest, then seemed to think better of it. She nodded slowly, exhaustion winning out over pride. The children had finished eating and were watching the adults with nervous attention. Lydia still had her arms around the twins. June had fallen asleep in Marin's lap, one small hand tangled in her mother's dress. Lydia, Calder said, and the girl's head came up sharply. You're the oldest. I need you to help your mother get the little one settled while I ride to town. Can you do that? Lydia nodded seriously. Yes, sir. Good. There's blankets in the trunk by the window, extra pillows on the shelf. Make yourselves comfortable. He paused, then added awkwardly, and don't touch anything you're not sure about. Some of my tools are sharp. We'll be careful, Lydia promised. We won't break anything. The earnestness in her voice made Calder's chest ache. These kids had learned to apologize for existing, to make themselves small and quiet and convenient, to expect nothing and be grateful for crumbs. Well, that was going to change if they were staying in his house. He caught himself on that thought. If they were staying, not when. He'd agreed to feed them and get the baby medical help. That didn't mean he was keeping them. That didn't mean this was permanent. He wasn't ready for permanent. He wasn't ready for any of this. But when he looked at Maureen, really looked at her, he saw the same expression he'd seen in his own mirror for the past 2 years. The look of someone who'd lost everything and kept walking anyway because stopping meant giving up, and giving up meant death. She'd walked for 2 weeks with 5 starving children, trying to find someone who'd help. And she'd found him. God help them all. I'll be back before dark, Calder said, reaching for his coat. Don't answer the door for anyone but me. Don't go outside unless you have to. And don't... He stopped himself. Don't what? Don't leave? Don't disappear while he was gone? We'll be here, Marin said softly, as if she could read his thoughts. I give you my word, Mr. Briggs. We'll be here when you get back. Calder nodded once, sharp and quick, and headed for the door before he could do something stupid, like believe her. The ride to town took 3 hours on his best horse, a sturdy mare named Sable, who'd been with him since before Hannah died. Calder pushed her harder than he should have, his mind racing faster than her hooves. What the hell was he doing? He had 6 strangers in his house. 6 mouths to feed when he could barely feed himself. A sick baby who might die anyway. A widow who looked half dead herself. 4 kids who'd been through hell and would need more than a few hot meals to recover. And what did he have to offer them? A falling apart ranch. Overdue taxes. A broken man who could barely remember how to talk to people. This was going to end badly. He knew it with the certainty of experience. But when he closed his eyes, he saw Ruth's fevered face, Lydia's too serious eyes, the twins' desperate hunger, June's tiny thumb in her mouth, Marin's hands shaking as she tried to hold on to what was left of her family. He saw his own daughter's grave on the hillside and the empty cradle gathering dust. And he knew, with the same bone-deep certainty, that he couldn't turn them away. Not now. Maybe not ever. Town was busy when he arrived, the Saturday market in full swing. Calder hitched Sable outside the general store and took the stairs to Doc Henderson's office, two at a time. The doctor was an old man with kind eyes and steady hands who'd delivered half the babies in the county and buried a good portion of them, too. He looked up from his desk when Calder burst in, surprise crossing his weathered face. "Calder Briggs, haven't seen you in town for months. What's wrong?" "Need you to come out to my place. Got a sick baby. Fever, labored breathing, maybe 4 months old." Doc Henderson was already reaching for his bag. "This your baby?" "No. Widow woman showed up at my door this morning with 5 kids, all of them half-starved. The baby's the worst." The doctor paused, giving Calder a long, measured look. "You taking in charity cases now?" "I'm taking in people who need help." Calder's voice came out harder than he intended. "You coming or not?" "I'm coming." Doc Henderson grabbed his coat. "But Calder, you know what people will say about a widower taking in a widow woman and her children." "I don't give a damn what people say." "Maybe you should." The doctor's tone was gentle but firm. "This is a small town. People talk, and not all of it's kind." Calder thought about Marin's desperate eyes, about Lydia's too adult protectiveness, about a baby burning up with fever while her mother had nothing to give her but prayers and starvation. "Let them talk," he said flatly. "That baby needs help today. I'll worry about gossip tomorrow." Doc Henderson studied him for another moment, then nodded. "Fair enough. Let's go." They rode back together, the doctor on a borrowed horse from the livery. Calder filled him in on what he knew, which wasn't much. Marin had been walking for 2 weeks. The children were malnourished but seemed otherwise healthy. The baby's fever had come on in the last few days. "And you just took them in?" Doc Henderson asked. "All of them? Just like that?" "What was I supposed to do? Let them die on my porch?" Most men would have pointed them toward the church or the county office. "Most men aren't worth much then, are they?" The doctor was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, very softly, "Hannah would be proud of you." Calder's hands tightened on the reins. He didn't trust himself to answer. They made it back to the ranch just as the sun was starting its descent toward the western mountains. Calder's cabin, which had looked so small and empty this morning, now seemed to glow with warmth and life. Someone had lit the lamps. Smoke curled from the chimney, and through the window he could see movement inside, small shapes darting back and forth, the shadow of a woman moving between them. His heart did something strange in his chest, something that felt almost like hope. He dismounted and helped Doc Henderson with his bag, then pushed open the cabin door. The scene that greeted him stopped him dead in his tracks. The cabin was clean, not just clean, transformed. The dishes had been washed and stacked. The floor had been swept. Someone had even scrubbed the windows, letting in more light than he'd seen in 2 years. The blankets from the trunk were arranged into neat pallets near the fireplace, and the little ones were curled up on them, fast asleep despite the early hour. Marin sat in the rocking chair, Hannah's old rocking chair that he'd shoved into the corner because he couldn't bear to look at it, with Ruth in her arms. She was singing softly, some lullaby he didn't recognize, and the baby's breathing seemed easier than it had this morning. She looked up when they came in, and her whole face flooded with relief. "Mr. Briggs, you came back," as if there'd been any doubt. "Brought the doctor," Calder said gruffly, gesturing to Doc Henderson. "Let him look at the baby." The examination was thorough but quick. Doc Henderson checked Ruth's temperature, listened to her breathing, examined her color and responses. When he finally sat back, his expression was cautiously optimistic. "Fever's broken some. Could be the medicine you gave her. Could be just her body fighting back. She's malnourished. They all are. But with proper food and rest, I think she'll pull through." He looked at Marin seriously. "You got to her just in time, ma'am. Another few days?" He didn't need to finish the sentence. Marin's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you so much." "Thank Calder. He's the one who rode 12 miles to fetch me." Doc Henderson packed up his bag and stood. "I'll leave some more medicine and some instructions for feeding her. Build her strength up slowly. Don't overwhelm her stomach. Same goes for the other children. Little bits of food, often, until they can handle full meals. He pulled Calder aside while Marin tended to the baby. "You're doing a good thing here," he said quietly. "But you need to be careful. This town, people are going to have opinions about a man and a woman living together unwed." "They're not living here," Calder said automatically. "She just needed help with the kids." "And how long is just going to last?" Doc Henderson raised an eyebrow. "Because from where I'm standing, that woman's put down roots. Cleaned your whole cabin in an afternoon, got your fire going, made the place look like a home again." He paused. "When's the last time this place looked like a home, Calder?" Calder didn't answer. Couldn't answer. The doctor clapped him on the shoulder. "Think about it. And if you need anything at all, you know where to find me." After he left, the cabin fell into an awkward silence. Marin busied herself with settling Ruth back into the bed. Calder stood in the middle of his transformed home, feeling like a stranger in his own space. "You didn't have to do all this," he finally said. Marin looked up from tucking blankets around the baby. "I told you I'd earn my keep. I meant you could rest. You were half dead this morning." "I've been half dead for months. Keeping busy helps." She smoothed the blankets with careful hands. "Besides, I wanted to. You gave us food, shelter, medicine. The least I could do was make the place decent." "It was decent before." "It was clean before. Now it's decent." Her voice was gentle but firm. "There's a difference, Mr. Briggs. A clean house is just walls and a floor. A decent house is something you can build a life in." The words hung between them, heavy with implications neither of them seemed ready to address. "The children," Calder said abruptly. "They doing all right?" "They're exhausted, asleep before their heads hit the pillows. I don't think they've felt safe enough to really sleep in weeks." Marin's voice softened. "Lydia helped me with everything. That girl's had to grow up too fast. Reminds me of someone else I know." Marin's laugh was bitter. "I suppose it does." She looked around the cabin, at the sleeping children, at the clean floors, at the home she'd made in the space of an afternoon. "Mr. Briggs, I need to talk to you about arrangements." "Arrangements?" Calder crossed his arms, suddenly wary. "How long we can stay. What work you'll need from me. When we'll need to move on." She met his eyes directly. "I meant what I said this morning. I'll work for our keep, but I won't impose on your charity forever. Once the children are strong enough to travel, once I've saved up enough money." "Where will you go?" The question came out sharper than he intended. Marin blinked. I don't know. West, maybe? Oregon? California? Somewhere there's work." "With 5 kids? No money? No family?" Calder shook his head. "You'll end up right back where you were this morning. Or worse. What choice do I have?" Her voice rose slightly, and she glanced at the sleeping children, forcing herself quiet again. "I can't stay here forever. You're a single man. I'm a widow. People will talk. The children need stability, not what? A roof over their heads? Food in their bellies?" Calder took a step forward. "You think I care what people say about me? You should care. It'll affect you, your reputation, your standing in town." "My standing in town is already dirt. My reputation's been the hermit who lives alone and won't talk to anyone for 2 years. He ran a hand through his hair, frustration building. "I'm not asking you to leave, Mrs. Calhoun. You're not asking me to stay either." The truth of it settled between them like dust. Calder looked at her, really looked at her, and saw past the dirt and exhaustion to the woman underneath. Younger than he'd first thought. Maybe 25, 26. Dark hair that would probably curl if it was clean and brushed. Eyes that had seen too much but hadn't given up hope entirely. Hands that were rough from work but gentle with her children. She was still standing, still fighting, still trying to protect what was hers. Just like Hannah had been. Just like he used to be, before grief hollowed him out. "I don't know what I'm asking," he admitted finally. "I don't know what this is or what it's going to be. All I know is that you and your kids needed help, and I can give it. So for now, for today, that's enough. And tomorrow? Tomorrow we figure out tomorrow." He gestured around the cabin. "You've already made this place more of a home in 1 day than I've managed in 2 years, so maybe Maybe we just take it one day at a time, see what happens. Marin studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then, slowly, she nodded. One day at a time, she repeated softly. I can do that. Good. Calder moved toward the door, suddenly needing air. I'll bed down in the barn tonight, give you and the kids more room. Mr. Briggs, it's fine, I've slept in worse places. He paused with his hand on the door. Lock this behind me. Don't open it for anyone but me. Will you be warm enough out there? The question, simple, concerned, domestic, hit him like a physical blow. When was the last time someone had asked if he'd be warm enough? If he'd eaten enough? If he was all right? I'll be fine, he managed. Get some rest, Mrs. Calhoun. Marin, she said quietly, if we're living under the same roof, even temporarily, you might as well call me Marin. Marin. The name felt strange on his tongue. Foreign. Like speaking a language he'd forgotten. Calder. She smiled, just a small, tired thing, but it was the first real smile he'd seen from her. Good night, Calder. Good night. He slipped out into the cold Montana evening and stood for a moment on his own porch, looking up at the stars scattered across the darkening sky. Inside the cabin, he could hear soft sounds, a baby's murmur, a child's sleepy question, Marin's gentle answer, the sounds of a family. His cabin, his empty, silent, grief-filled cabin, was full of life again. And Calder Briggs stood alone in the dark, wondering if he was saving these people or if, somehow, they were saving him. The barn was colder than Calder remembered, but he didn't mind. He'd spent plenty of nights out here over the past 2 years, nights when the cabin felt too full of ghosts, when Hannah's absence screamed louder than any presence could. Tonight was different, though. Tonight he wasn't running from memories. He was making space for something new, something fragile and uncertain that he didn't quite know how to name yet. He bedded down in the hayloft with a couple of old horse blankets, listening to Sable shift in her stall below and the wind whistle through the gaps in the boards. Sleep came in fits and starts, his mind too busy cataloging everything that had changed in the span of a single day. This morning he'd been alone. Tonight there were 6 other people sleeping under his roof, or rather, he was the one not sleeping under his roof anymore. The irony wasn't lost on him. When dawn broke, pale and cold, Calder was already up and moving. He milked the cow, a temperamental old girl named Bess who'd stopped producing much after Hannah died, as if she too was grieving. This morning, though, she seemed calmer, and the milk came easier. Maybe she could sense the change in the air. Maybe Calder was just imagining things. He carried the milk pail back to the cabin and paused outside the door, suddenly uncertain. This was his house. He'd built it with his own hands. But somehow, standing here with dawn light touching the windows and smoke curling from the chimney, he felt like a visitor waiting for permission to enter. He knocked, softly. The door opened almost immediately. Marin stood there, already dressed, her hair pulled back in a braid that made her look younger than she had yesterday. She'd washed her face and hands, and there was color in her cheeks that hadn't been there before. Behind her, the cabin was already alive with quiet activity, Lydia helping June into a clean dress, the twins whispering to each other near the fireplace. "Good morning," Marin said, and her voice held a warmth that made something in Calder's chest tighten. "I was about to start breakfast. Is that milk?" He held out the pail wordlessly. She took it with a grateful smile. "The children will be so happy. None of them have had fresh milk in months." She stepped back, gesturing him inside. "Please, come in. You must be freezing." "I'm fine." But he came in anyway, stomping the cold from his feet. The cabin was warmer than it had been in 2 years, not just from the fire, but from the bodies filling it, the breath and life and motion of people who weren't ghosts. Lydia looked up from where she was braiding June's hair. "Good morning, Mr. Briggs." "Morning." Calder hung his coat on the peg by the door. "You can call me Calder." The little girl's eyes widened slightly. "Mama says we should be respectful." "Being respectful and being friendly aren't the same thing." He crouched down to her level. "Mr. Briggs was my father. I'm just Calder." Lydia glanced at her mother for permission. Marin nodded, and the girl's serious face softened into something almost like a smile. "Okay. Calder." The twins were less shy. They'd been examining his work tools in the corner, careful not to touch, just looking, and now they rushed over with identical expressions of excitement. "You got a real forge out in the barn," one of them said breathlessly. "We saw it through the window. And hammers and tongs and everything," the other added. "Do you make things? Can you show us?" "Stand, Bo. Don't pester him," Marin called from where she was mixing cornmeal batter. "Mr. Briggs, Calder, has work to do." "It's all right." Calder found himself almost smiling. "Yeah, I work metal sometimes. Fix tools, make horseshoes, whatever needs doing. Maybe I'll show you later if you're good." The boys lit up like Christmas morning. They scampered back to their corner, whispering excitedly to each other about forges and fire and all the things little boys found magical. Breakfast was cornmeal mush with fresh milk and a precious spoonful of honey that Calder had been saving. The children ate with slightly better manners than yesterday. Still hungry, still eager, but not quite so desperate. Ruth was awake and fussy, but seemed stronger. Her fever had broken completely overnight, and she nursed from Moran with more vigor than before. "The medicine worked," Marin said quietly, catching Calder watching. "I can't thank you enough. Doc Henderson did the work. I just rode to town." "You did more than that." She shifted Ruth to her other arm. "You opened your door. Most people wouldn't have." Calder didn't know what to say to that, so he said nothing. He finished his breakfast and stood, reaching for his coat. "I need to check the fences in the north pasture. Probably be gone most of the morning." "We'll be here." Marin's voice was steady. "Sure. I thought I might tackle the garden plot today, if that's all right. Get it ready for spring planting. Garden's been dead for 2 years. Might not be worth the effort." "Everything's worth the effort if you're willing to work for it." She met his eyes with quiet determination. "And I am willing to work, Calder. I meant what I said." He nodded slowly. "Tools are in the barn. Take whatever you need." Outside, the morning was clear and cold. Calder worked his way along the fence line, replacing broken posts and restringing wire where the cattle had pushed through. It was mindless work, the kind that let his thoughts wander. He kept thinking about the cabin, about the sounds of children's voices and the smell of breakfast cooking and the way Marin had smiled when she opened the door, about how strange it felt to come home to people instead of emptiness. Part of him wanted to run, to tell Marin to take the kids and leave before this got complicated, before he started depending on those sounds and smells and smiles. But another part of him, the part that had been silent and cold for 2 years, was waking up. And it was hungry for exactly what he was most afraid of. When he came back at midday for water and a quick meal, he found the garden plot transformed. Marin had cleared away 2 years of dead growth and weeds, turned over the soil, and marked out neat rows for planting. She was on her knees in the dirt, her dress tied up to keep it clean, her face flushed with exertion. Lydia was helping her, carrying rocks to the edge of the plot. The twins were supposed to be helping too, but they'd gotten distracted chasing a frog. June sat nearby, playing with pebbles and talking to herself in that nonsensical way toddlers had. It looked like a family. It looked like a life. Calder's throat tightened. Marin looked up and saw him standing there. She wiped dirt from her forehead, leaving a smudge behind. "We're making progress. Soil's better than I expected. We could have vegetables by summer if we plant soon." "We." The word stuck in his mind. Not you or I, but we. As if she was already thinking of this as a shared endeavor. As if she'd already decided to stay. "I mean," Marin caught herself, color rising in her cheeks. "If we're still here by summer, if you want us to be." "Do you want to be?" The question came out before Calder could stop it. Marin sat back on her heels, studying him. Around them, the children played and worked, oblivious to the weight of the conversation happening over their heads. "I want my children to be safe," she said carefully. "I want them to have enough to eat and a roof over their heads and a chance to be children again instead of just survivors. If that means staying here, if you're offering that, then yes, I want to be here. And if I'm not offering it, then I'll be grateful for every day you give us and move on when you say it's time." Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled slightly as she brushed dirt from her skirt. "I won't impose where I'm not wanted, Calder. I've got too much pride for that. But I also won't lie and say I want to leave. Not when this is the first place that's felt safe since my husband died." The honesty of it knocked the breath out of him. He wasn't used to people being direct anymore. Wasn't used to anyone caring what he thought or felt. "You can stay," he heard himself say, "long as you need to." Marin's whole face softened. "Thank you. But we need to talk about practical things, food, supplies, money." He ran a hand through his hair. "I've got enough to get us through maybe another week if we're careful. After that, I need to figure out how to stretch what we've got." "I can help with that. I'm good at making little go far. Had to be." Marin stood, brushing dirt from her knees. "And I can work. Not just here at the ranch, but in town if need be. I can take in sewing, laundry, whatever people need. Town's 12 miles away. I can walk it." "Not with 5 kids you can't." Calder shook his head. "We'll figure something out. Just let me think on it." That afternoon, while the children napped and Marin worked on mending clothes she'd found in his trunk, Hannah's old dresses, though he didn't tell her that, Calder sat at the table and did the math. It wasn't good. His savings were nearly gone. The ranch was barely producing enough to keep one man alive, let alone 7 people. He owed back taxes. The bank was making noises about the mortgage, and now he had 6 more mouths to feed. He was screwed. Completely, utterly screwed. But when June woke from her nap and toddled over to him, thumb in her mouth, and climbed right up into his lap as if she'd known him her whole life, Calder found he didn't care about the math anymore. The little girl settled against his chest, her head tucked under his chin, and went right back to sleep. She was warm and solid and real, and she trusted him completely without question or hesitation. Marie used to do this. Used to crawl into his lap and fall asleep while he worked on his ledgers or read by lamplight. His eyes burned. He blinked hard and kept his breathing steady so he wouldn't wake her. Across the room, Marin had stopped sewing. She was watching them with an expression Calder couldn't quite read, something soft and sad and hopeful all at once. "She doesn't usually warm up to strangers that fast," Marin said quietly. "Maybe I'm not a stranger anymore." "No." Marin's voice was almost a whisper. "I suppose you're not." The next few days fell into a rhythm that felt both strange and natural. Calder worked the ranch, fences, livestock, repairs that had been neglected for too long. Marin worked the house and garden, transforming both with an efficiency that spoke of years of practice. The children slowly came back to life, filling out, gaining strength, learning to laugh again. Lydia followed Calder around like a shadow, asking questions about everything. How did the cattle know where to go? Why did the fence posts need to be set so deep? What kind of wood was best for building? She had a sharp mind and a hunger to learn that reminded him painfully of himself at that age. The twins were harder to manage. They had energy that came from finally being fed regularly, and they got into everything. Calder found them in the forge one afternoon, trying to light the fire themselves. Another time, they'd climbed onto the roof of the barn and couldn't figure out how to get down. Marin apologized profusely each time, but Calder found himself more amused than angry. "Boys will be boys," he said, helping stand down from the barn roof while Bo watched from above. "I did worse at their age." "Did your father tan your hide for it?" Marin asked. "Every time. Didn't stop me, though." "Then what did?" Calder thought about it. "Growing up, I guess. Learning that actions have consequences. That kind of thing takes time." "Time," Marin smiled tiredly. "That's the one thing I can give them now. Thanks to you." By the end of the first week, the children had claimed the cabin as home. They knew which floorboards creaked, where the mouse hole was in the corner, how to work the pump at the sink. They'd named the chickens and learned to collect eggs without breaking them. Stan and Bo had made friends with Sable, sneaking her treats and brushing her mane until it shone. Ruth was thriving. Her fever stayed gone, and she was putting on weight, her little face filling out. She'd started smiling, real smiles, not just gas, and the sound of her baby laughter filled the cabin like music. Calder caught himself smiling more, talking more, coming inside for meals instead of eating alone in the barn. He still slept out there, wouldn't impose on Marin's space, wouldn't give the town gossips any more ammunition than they already had. But the days were spent together, working side by side, building something that felt dangerously like a life. It was Sunday morning when reality came crashing back. Calder had ridden into town for supplies, leaving Marin and the children at home. The general store was busy with after-church shoppers, and the moment Calder walked in, the conversations died like someone had blown out a candle. Everyone stared. Jeb Randall, the store owner, was a thick-necked man with shrewd eyes and a smile that never reached them. He leaned on his counter and looked Calder up and down like he was examining livestock. Well, Calder Briggs. Haven't seen you in weeks. Heard you've been busy. Just need supplies, Jeb. Calder pulled out his list. Flour, sugar, coffee, dried beans, salt pork. Necessities, nothing fancy. Supplies for 7, I hear. Jeb's smile widened. Word is you took in that widow woman and her pack of strays. That true? The store had gone completely silent. Every ear was tuned to their conversation. That's my business, Calder said evenly. It's the whole town's business when a widower and a widow set up house together without benefit of marriage. This came from Mrs. Hartley, a pinch-faced woman who ran the church auxiliary and considered herself the arbiter of public morality. It's unseemly, Mr. Briggs, scandalous even. Woman needed help. I helped her. Calder kept his voice level, but his hands were clenched into fists at his sides. Don't see what's scandalous about that. Don't you? Mrs. Hartley's eyebrows rose. A young woman living in your home, sharing your space? What kind of example does that set? The kind that says when someone's dying on your doorstep, you don't turn them away. Calder turned to face her fully. Or is that not in the Bible anymore? Must have missed that sermon. Mrs. Hartley's face flushed red. Don't you dare quote scripture at me. Then don't you dare judge me for doing what's right. Calder's voice rose despite his best efforts. That woman walked for 2 weeks with 5 starving children trying to find help. You know where she went first? The church. Know what they told her? That they didn't have resources for wanderers. So she kept walking, and she ended up at my door because I was the only person who didn't slam it in her face. The silence in the store was thick enough to cut with a knife. Reverend Morrison, who'd been standing quietly by the pickle barrel, cleared his throat. Mr. Briggs, I'm sure Mrs. Hartley meant no offense. Didn't she? Calder looked at the Reverend. Because it sounds to me like she's more concerned about appearances than about 6 people who almost starved to death. We have to maintain standards, Mrs. Hartley insisted. Moral standards. What you're doing, living with that woman unwed, it sets a bad precedent. You know what sets a bad precedent? Calder's voice dropped to something cold and dangerous. Letting children die because you're too worried about gossip to help them. He turned back to Jeb. You going to sell me these supplies or not? Jeb's expression had gone calculating. He looked at the list, then at Calder, then at the list again. Supplies cost money, Calder. You got money? I've got credit here, have for 5 years. Had credit, past tense. Jeb folded his arms. But that was when you were buying for 1. This is buying for 7. That's a different proposition. What are you saying? I'm saying I need payment up front. Cash money. No more credit. The store erupted in whispers. Calder's jaw clenched so tight his teeth ached. You know I don't have cash right now. Harvest won't come in for months. Then I guess you'll have to figure something out. Jeb's smile was cruel. Can't run a business on charity, Calder. Especially not for people who aren't even your responsibility. They're human beings who needed help. They're a burden. And now they're your burden. Jeb leaned forward. Tell you what. You come back when you've got real money or when you've sent that woman and her brood on their way, and we'll talk about credit again. Until then, my hands are tied. Calder stood frozen, rage and humiliation warring inside him. Every eye in the store was on him, judging, condemning, finding him wanting. He turned and walked out without another word. The ride home was the longest 12 miles of his life. No supplies, no food. Nothing but the crushing weight of reality settling on his shoulders like a yoke. He'd been a fool. A romantic fool who thought good intentions could substitute for practical planning. Marin and the children were depending on him, and he'd just failed them spectacularly. When he got home, Marin took one look at his face and sent the children outside to play. What happened? She asked quietly. Calder told her. All of it. The stares, the gossip, Jeb's refusal to extend credit. The town's judgment laid bare. Marin listened in silence, her face growing paler with each word. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "It's because of me," she finally said. "Because I'm here. Because people think we're—" She couldn't finish the sentence. "It's because people are small-minded and cruel. It's because they're not wrong." Marin stood abruptly, pacing to the window. "We are living together, unwed, with children. Of course they're talking. Of course they're judging. I should have realized. What? That helping someone in need would cost me my reputation?" Calder's laugh was bitter. "I told you before, I don't care what they think." "But I care what it costs you." Marin spun to face him, and there were tears in her eyes. "You've given us everything. Your food, your home, your time. And now you're standing in the community. How much more am I supposed to take from you before I admit this was a mistake?" "It's not a mistake. Isn't it?" She gestured around the cabin. "Look at us, Calder. I've been here a week, and already you can't buy supplies. What happens in another week, another month? When winter comes and we've got 7 mouths to feed and no credit and no money, and a town that hates us? We'll figure it out." "How?" Her voice broke. "How are we going to figure it out? I can't work in town. They won't hire me. You can't sell anything. Nobody will buy. We're trapped, and it's my fault, and I—" She stopped, pressing her hands over her mouth as if she could force the words back in. Calder crossed the room in 3 strides. He took her shoulders gently, making her look at him. "Listen to me. This is not your fault. None of it. Not the gossip, not Jeb being a bastard, not any of it." His voice was firm. "You did what you had to do to save your kids. That's not wrong. That's not shameful. That's survival. But now you're suffering for it." "I'm not suffering. I'm living." The words surprised him even as he said them. "For the first time in 2 years, I'm actually living instead of just existing. You and those kids. You brought life back into this place, into me. So don't you dare apologize for that." Marin stared at him, tears streaming down her face. "What are we going to do?" That was the question, wasn't it? What were they going to do? Calder thought about his options. They were limited. He could sell some livestock, but he needed them to keep the ranch running. He could take out a loan, but no bank would lend to him with overdue taxes hanging over his head. He could find work in town, but who would hire a man the whole community had turned against? Unless. "There might be one thing," he said slowly. "What?" "Your husband. You said he died in a mine collapse?" Marin nodded warily. 4 months ago, the Lucky Strike mine. They said it was an accident, but they didn't pay compensation, said he'd violated safety rules. But there'd be a death certificate, documentation. Yes. Why? Calder's mind was racing now, pieces falling into place. Because widows with documentation can claim territorial relief funds. It's not much, but it's something. And if we file the paperwork, we tried. The territorial office said we didn't have proper proof of marriage. Our certificate was lost in a fire years ago, and they wouldn't accept my word alone. Marin's voice was flat with old defeat. They said without documentation I wasn't legally his widow, so no relief. But if we could prove it, how? Everyone who was at our wedding is dead or scattered. The preacher moved east. The witnesses are gone. There's no way to prove something that happened 9 years ago without any records. She was right, and Calder knew it. But the defeat in her voice made him want to punch something. Then we find another way, he said firmly. I've still got some savings. Not much, but enough to hold us for a few weeks. And I can hunt, fish. We'll make do. For how long? Marin pulled away from him, wrapping her arms around herself. How long can we make do before we run out of options? Before the bank takes your ranch or the county seizes it for taxes? Before we're right back where we started, only now you've lost everything too? I won't let that happen. You can't promise that. She looked at him with such sadness it hurt. You can't control everything, Calder. Sometimes things fall apart no matter how hard you try to hold them together. She sounded like she was talking from experience, like she'd watched her whole world collapse before and knew exactly how it felt. Maybe, Calder admitted, but I can control what I do about it, and I choose to keep fighting, for you, for those kids, for this. He gestured around the cabin, at the home they'd built together, however fragile and temporary it might be. Marin's expression softened slightly. "You're a stubborn man," Calder Briggs. "So I've been told." He managed a small smile. "Question is, are you stubborn enough to keep fighting with me?" For a long moment she didn't answer. Outside they could hear the children playing, Stan and Bo arguing over something, Lydia's patient voice mediating, June's bright laughter. "Yes," Marin finally said. "God help us both, but yes." They stood there in the quiet cabin, the weight of uncertainty hanging between them, but also something else. Something that felt almost like partnership, like solidarity, like maybe, just maybe, they were stronger together than they'd been apart. That night, after the children were asleep, Marin brought out her late husband's watch, the one she'd tried to give Calder before. She set it on the table between them, the gold-catching lamplight. "Take it," she said quietly. "Sell it. Use the money for food." Calder looked at the watch. It was fine craftsmanship, probably worth a decent amount, enough to buy supplies for a month, maybe more. It was also the last piece of her old life, the last connection to the man she'd loved and lost. "No," he said. "Calder, no." He pushed it back across the table toward her. "That's yours. Your memories. I won't take that from you. Memories don't feed children. Neither does guilt." He met her eyes. "You sell that watch, you'll regret it every day for the rest of your life. And when times get hard again, and they will, you'll have nothing left of him to hold on to. I won't do that to you." "Then what? I'll sell my mare." The words came out before he'd fully thought them through, but once said, he knew they were right. "Sable's a good horse, strong, well-trained. She'll fetch a fair price." Marin's eyes widened. "Your horse? But how will you get to town? How will you work the ranch?" "I'll walk. I'll manage. It's just a horse." "It's not just a horse." She reached across the table, covering his hand with hers. "That horse is your transportation, your livelihood, part of how you work this ranch. And you're part of this family now." Calder looked down at her hand on his. Small, work-roughened, warm. Family takes care of each other, even if it costs something. "We're not—" Marin stopped, color rising in her cheeks. "We're not family, not really. We're just—" "What? What are we, Marin?" She pulled her hand back, flustered. "I don't know, people helping each other. An arrangement." "Is that what this feels like to you? An arrangement?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implications neither seemed ready to face. "I don't know what this is," Marin admitted finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "All I know is that being here, with you, in this place, it feels more like home than anywhere I've been since my husband died. And that terrifies me." "Why?" "Because homes can be lost, people can leave, and I don't think my heart can survive breaking again." She stood abruptly, turning away from him. "I should check on Ruth." She fled to the bed where the baby slept, leaving Calder alone at the table with her husband's watch gleaming in the lamplight. He understood her fear. God, did he understand it. He'd felt the same way when Hannah died, like his heart had been torn out of his chest and buried with her, like he'd never be whole again, like loving anyone ever again would be a betrayal of what they'd had. But watching Marin with her children, seeing her smile when she thought no one was looking, hearing her laugh at something Stan said, it made him want to be whole again, made him want to risk his heart one more time, even if it scared him half to death. The next morning, Calder rode Sable into town before dawn. He didn't tell Marin where he was going, didn't want to see the guilt in her eyes or hear her try to talk him out of it. The livery stable was run by an honest man named Pete Dawson, who'd always been fair in his dealings. When Calder explained what he needed, Pete examined Sable with the careful attention of a man who knew horses. "She's a fine animal," Pete said, running his hands down her legs, checking her teeth and hooves. "Sound, well-trained, good temperament. I can give you $80 for her." It was a fair price. More than fair, actually. But it still felt like selling a part of himself. "Make it 100, and we have a deal," Calder heard himself say. Pete raised an eyebrow. "You're in no position to negotiate, Briggs. Everyone knows you're desperate." "Maybe. But you also know this horse is worth more than 80. She's the best mare you'll see this year, and we both know it." They stared at each other. Finally, Pete grinned. 90, final offer. Deal. They shook hands, and Pete counted out the money in cash. Calder tucked it into his pocket, said goodbye to Sable with a throat too tight for words, and started the long walk home. It was 12 miles. In the growing heat of the day, with no water and no shade for most of the journey. By mile 6, Calder was regretting every decision that had led him to this moment. By mile 8, he was fantasizing about water. By mile 10, his feet were blistering in his boots and his head was pounding from sun and dehydration. He stumbled the last 2 miles on pure stubbornness, driven by the thought of Marion's face when he showed her the money. Of the children's smiles when they had full bellies again, of proving to the whole damn town that he could take care of his people, because that's what they were now. His people. His family. When the cabin finally came into view, shimmering in the heat haze, Calder had never been so happy to see anything in his life. He made it as far as the porch before his legs gave out. The door flew open and Marin was there, her face white with shock. "Calder, oh God, what happened? Where's Sable? Are you hurt?" He tried to answer, but his mouth was too dry. He fumbled in his pocket and pulled out the money, pressing it into her hands. $90, he managed to rasp. "Should hold us for a while." Marin stared at the money, then at him, then back at the money. "You sold her," she whispered. "You sold your horse." Needed the money. "You walked 12 miles in this heat. I'm fine." "You're not fine, you stubborn fool. You're half dead." Her voice rose to something close to a shout. "Lydia, bring water! Quick!" The children came running, their faces frightened. Lydia brought the water dipper with shaking hands. Marin held it to Calder's lips, supporting his head with her other hand, and he drank in desperate gulps. "Slow," she murmured. "Slow, or you'll make yourself sick." When he drained the dipper, she sent Lydia for more and helped Calder into the cabin. He collapsed into the chair, his chair, though it felt more like hers now, and let her fuss over him. She brought cold compresses for his head, made him drink more water, pulled off his boots to reveal bloody blisters. She gasped at the sight. "Why would you do this?" Her hands trembled as she cleaned the blisters with gentle care. "Why would you hurt yourself like this for us?" "Because you're worth it," Calder said simply. Marin's hands stilled. She looked up at him with eyes full of tears. "We're not worth this much," she whispered. "We're not worth you destroying yourself. That's not your call to make." Calder, I chose this, Marin. I chose you and those kids, and I'd do it again." He reached out, tilting her chin up so she had to meet his eyes. "Stop trying to push me away. Stop waiting for me to give up on you. It's not going to happen." A tear slipped down her cheek. "You barely know us." "I know enough." His thumb brushed away the tear without thinking. "I know you're strong and stubborn, and you'd walk through fire for your children. I know you make this cabin feel like a home. I know when you smile, it's like the sun coming out. And I know—" He stopped, the words catching in his throat. "What?" Marin whispered. "What do you know?" "I know I haven't felt this alive in 2 years," Calder admitted. "And that scares me more than anything. But I'm done running from it. Done hiding in the barn and pretending this is temporary. This is real, Marin. What we're building here, it's real." Marin's breath caught. For a long moment, they just looked at each other, the air between them thick with everything they weren't saying. Then June toddled over and climbed into Calder's lap, completely oblivious to the tension. She patted his cheek with one chubby hand. "Hungry," she announced. The spell broke. Marin laughed, a wet, shaky sound, and wiped her eyes. "Then let's get you fed, sweetheart." She stood, smoothing her skirt. "Calder, you rest. I'll make supper." "I can help. You can sit there and not fall over. That's all the help I need from you right now." He wanted to argue, but his body was done. He sat in the chair with June on his lap while Marin cooked, and the other children slowly crept closer, curious about what had happened. Stan was brave enough to ask, "Why did you sell your horse?" "Because your mama needed money for food." "But how will you get places without a horse?" "I'll walk, or maybe I'll get another horse someday. It's all right, son." Don't worry about it. The word son slipped out naturally, without thought. Stan's eyes widened and he looked at Bo, then back at Calder. Can we call you Pa? He asked hopefully. The question hit Calder like a physical blow. He looked at Marin, who'd frozen at the stove. Calder's voice came out rough. That's up to your mama, boys. Marin turned slowly. Her face was unreadable. We'll see, she said carefully. For now, why don't you call him Calder? Is that all right? The twins nodded, though Stan looked disappointed. That night, after the children were asleep, and Calder had finally convinced Marin that he was fine, just tired, they sat together at the table. The $90 sat between them, more money than either had seen in months, but also a reminder of what it had cost. Tomorrow, I'll go back to town, Marin said. Buy supplies while they're still willing to take cash. Take Lydia with you. She's smart. She'll remember what we need. And you'll rest? I'll try. Marin smiled slightly. You're a terrible liar. I know. They sat in comfortable silence, the lamplight casting shadows on the walls. Outside, an owl hooted. Inside, Ruth made small sleeping sounds. Calder? Marin's voice was quiet. Yeah? Thank you. For everything. For all of it. She reached across the table, taking his hand. I don't know how I'll ever repay you. You already have, Calder said, squeezing her fingers gently. Every day, just by being here. And in that moment, sitting in the warm cabin with her hand in his and the sounds of sleeping children around them, Calder Briggs realized something that terrified and exhilarated him in equal measure. He was falling in love with her, with all of them. And he had no idea what to do about it. The realization sat in Calder's chest like a stone for 3 days before he let himself examine it too closely. He was falling in love. Maybe had already fallen. And the weight of that truth was both terrifying and strangely liberating, like standing at the edge of a cliff and choosing to jump. Marin and Lydia made the trip to town that Tuesday, taking the wagon Calder hitched to his remaining draft horse. They left before dawn and didn't return until late afternoon. The wagon bed loaded with flour, cornmeal, beans, salt pork, sugar, coffee, and lamp oil. Real supplies. Enough to last them through spring if they were careful. But Marin's face when she climbed down from the wagon told Calder the trip had cost more than money. What happened? He asked, helping her unload sacks of grain while Lydia took the younger children inside. Nothing. Marin's voice was too tight, too controlled. Just town being town. Marin. She stopped, her hands gripping a bag of flour so hard her knuckles went white. Mrs. Hartley made sure everyone in the store knew we were there. Made comments about that poor rancher supporting a woman and her whole brood and how it was charity gone too far. Jeb Randall took our money but made sure to count it twice, like he thought we might short him. And the church ladies, her voice cracked. They whispered the whole time, loud enough for me to hear, not loud enough for me to call them on it, about impropriety and sin and setting bad examples. Calder's jaw clenched. Did anyone say anything to Lydia? A few children stared. One boy called her charity case. Marin's eyes flashed with protective fury. Lydia just lifted her chin and ignored him. She's got more dignity than the whole town put together. But Calder, she's 8 years old. She shouldn't have to... Her composure crumbled. She set the flour down and pressed her hands over her face, shoulders shaking. Calder pulled her into his arms without thinking. She stiffened for a moment, then collapsed against his chest, sobbing quietly into his shirt. I'm ruining your life, she choked out. Everything you had, your standing, your credit, your reputation, I've destroyed it all just by being here. You haven't destroyed anything. Calder's arms tightened around her. Those people were never really my friends anyway. I've been a ghost to them for 2 years. At least now they have a reason to talk about me other than poor widower won't come out of his cabin. That's not funny. Wasn't trying to be funny. Was trying to be honest. He pulled back enough to look at her face, using his thumb to wipe away her tears. Listen to me. I don't care what they think. I care about you and those kids being safe and fed and having a place to call home. Everything else is just noise. But what about the taxes, the mortgage, the county agent? The county agent, Calder had almost forgotten. When's he coming? Marin's face went pale. Next week, I heard talk in town. He's making his rounds, collecting overdue payments. Calder, if you can't pay, I know. He released her, running a hand through his hair. I know what happens. They'll seize the property, auction it off. I'll lose everything. How much do you owe? $240. The number sat between them like a death sentence. I've got... He did the math quickly in his head. Maybe 30 left from what we didn't spend on supplies, and no way to earn the rest before he gets here. They stood in the yard, the weight of impossible mathematics crushing down on them. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the ranch Calder had built with his own hands, that held every memory of his life with Hannah, that was supposed to be his legacy. There has to be a way, Marin said desperately. We could sell more livestock, or tools, or... Wouldn't be enough, not in time. Calder looked around at everything he was about to lose. And even if it was, I can't sell what keeps this place running. The cattle are my breeding stock. The tools are how I work. Without them, there's no ranch anyway. Then what do we do? Before Calder could answer, the sound of hoofbeats cut through the air. They both turned to see a rider coming up the path, a lean man on a dun horse, moving with the confident ease of someone who owned the land he rode on. Calder's stomach dropped. He knew that rider, knew him all too well. Thomas Gentry, the county land agent, a week early. Go inside, Calder told Marin quietly. I'm not leaving you. Please, just take the children and go inside. Lock the door. Something in his tone made Marin obey. She gathered the last of the supplies and hurried into the cabin. Through the window, Calder could see her corralling the children, pulling them away from curious stares. Gentry dismounted with a smile that was all teeth and no warmth. He was maybe 40, dressed too well for a county employee, his boots polished to a shine that spoke of money from sources beyond his government salary. Calder Briggs, been meaning to ride out here for weeks. Gentry's eyes swept over the property with the calculating gaze of a man appraising livestock. Place looks better than I expected. Heard you'd let it go to seed after your wife died. What do you want, Gentry? Just doing my job, collecting what's owed to the county. He pulled a leather notebook from his saddlebag and flipped it open. Let's see. 2 years of back taxes at $120 per year. That's $240 plus 15 in penalties and interest. Makes it $255 total. The number had grown. Of course it had. I need more time, Calder said. That's what you said 6 months ago, and 6 months before that. Gentry snapped the notebook shut. Time's up, Briggs. I've got orders from the county to collect or seize. Those are my only options. I can get the money. Just give me until harvest. Harvest is 4 months away. I'm not authorized to wait that long. Gentry's eyes drifted to the cabin, where Marin's silhouette was visible through the window. Though I heard you've taken in some extra mouths to feed. Widow woman and her kids. That true? Calder's hands curled into fists. That's none of your business. It's county business when a man can't pay his taxes but can afford to support 6 extra people. Gentry's smile widened. Makes a person wonder about priorities. Get off my land. It's not your land. Not anymore. Not unless you can pay what you owe by... Gentry made a show of checking his pocket watch. Let's say 2 weeks from today. That's generous, considering. 2 weeks? 2 weeks? Otherwise, this property goes to auction. And Briggs? Gentry swung back into his saddle. You might want to tell that widow woman to start looking for a new place to stay. Because come auction day, whoever buys this land won't want squatters. He rode off, leaving Calder standing in the yard with rage and helplessness warring in his gut. The cabin door opened. Marin emerged, her face stricken. I heard, she said quietly. I heard all of it. 2 weeks. Calder's voice was hollow. 2 weeks to find money I don't have and can't earn. There has to be something, some way. There isn't. He turned to face her. I've thought about this from every angle. I don't have anything valuable enough to sell, no family to borrow from, no friends wealthy enough to loan me that kind of money, and no bank will touch me with the property already in arrears. Marin was quiet for a long moment. Then she straightened her spine and Calder saw steel come into her expression. The watch, she said. No. Listen to me. That watch is solid gold. It was expensive. My husband saved for 2 years to buy it. It has to be worth something. Not enough. Even if it's worth $100, which is generous, that still leaves us $155 short. Then we sell other things. My wedding ring, the silver brush my mother gave me. Whatever we can find. Marin, stop. Calder caught her hands. I'm not letting you strip yourself bare of every memory, every piece of your past, just to save my ranch. It's not just your ranch anymore. Her voice rose, fierce and desperate. It's our home, mine and the children's. Where else do we have to go? What happens to us when they take this place and you have nothing left? The question hung between them like a blade. I don't know, Calder admitted. I honestly don't know. That night, after the children were asleep, they sat at the table and laid out everything of value they had between them. Marin's watch, her wedding ring, a thin gold band worn smooth from years of wear, a silver hairbrush with her mother's initials on it, a small music box that played a tinny lullaby, Calder's good Sunday suit, his father's pocket knife, his wedding ring, which he'd continued wearing even after Hannah died. It wasn't enough. Even if they got top dollar for everything, they might scrape together $100. Maybe $120 if they were lucky. They were still over $100 short. There's one more thing, Marin said quietly. Calder looked up. Her face was pale but determined. I could work. In town, Mrs. Henderson, the doctor's wife, she mentioned they needed help. Laundry, cooking, housekeeping. She said she'd pay fair wages. How much? $2 a week. It was decent money for that kind of work. But the math still didn't work. That's $8 in 2 weeks, Calder said. We'd still be short. Then I'll find more work. I'll take in sewing at night. Do laundry for other families, whatever it takes. Marin, you can't work yourself to death. What choice do I have? Her eyes flashed. What choice do any of us have? You sold your horse for us, walked 12 miles in the heat, gave up everything to help us. Now it's my turn to give something back. This isn't about keeping score. No, it's about family. She reached across the table and gripped his hand hard. You said we were family, that this was real, so let me act like it. Let me fight for this too. Calder wanted to argue, wanted to tell her she'd already given enough, already sacrificed enough, but the determination in her eyes stopped him. All right, he said quietly. You can take the work with Mrs. Henderson, but we do this together. I'll find what work I can in town too. Between both of us, maybe we can scrape together enough. Together, Marin agreed. They sealed it with a handshake that turned into something more. Fingers intertwining, palms pressed together, both of them holding on like drowning people clutching a lifeline. The next morning, Marin left for town before dawn. She'd arranged with Mrs. Henderson to work 6 days a week, staying overnight on the long days so she wouldn't have to make the journey twice. Lydia would manage the younger children during the day, with Calder checking in between his own attempts to find work. Watching Marin walk away with a small bundle of her things and fear in her eyes was one of the hardest things Calder had ever done. Will Mama come back? June asked, her small hand slipping into Calder's. Yes, sweetheart, she'll come back. She promised. When? Soon. It wasn't soon enough. The house felt wrong without Marin in it. Too quiet, despite the children. Lydia did her best, cooking simple meals and keeping the younger ones occupied, but she was still a child herself. The weight of responsibility sat heavy on her small shoulders. Calder found work where he could. A day of fence repair for a neighbor, shoeing horses at the livery, splitting wood for the widows on Church Street. Every job paid pennies, but pennies added up. He worked until his hands bled and his back screamed, coming home each night to collapse in the barn, with barely enough energy to eat the simple dinner Lydia saved for him. The twins started acting out. Without their mother's steadying presence, they got into everything. Knocked over the butter churn, let the chickens out of their coop, nearly set the barn on fire trying to help with the forge. Calder found himself yelling more than he meant to, his patience worn thin by exhaustion and fear. On the third day, Ruth developed a cough. It started small, just a tickle, but by evening she was wheezing with every breath. Lydia brought her to Calder with tears in her eyes. She sounds like she did before, when she had the fever. What if she's getting sick again? Calder listened to the baby's labored breathing and felt ice settle in his stomach. We need your mother or the doctor. Mama's in town. She won't be back until tomorrow night. Then I'll take Ruth to the doctor. You don't have a horse, and it's 12 miles. Calder looked down at the baby in his arms, at her flushed face and rattling chest, looked at Lydia's frightened eyes, at Stan and Bo huddled in the corner, scared and trying not to show it. He made a decision. Lydia, you're in charge. Keep the boys inside. Don't let anyone in except me or your mother. Understand? Where are you going? To get help. He bundled Ruth in blankets, tucked her inside his coat against his chest, and started walking. 12 miles. In the dark. With a sick baby and no light to guide him except the moon. The first few miles weren't bad. Ruth dozed fitfully against his chest, her small body radiating heat. Calder kept a steady pace, focusing on each step rather than the impossible distance ahead. But by mile 5, his legs were screaming. By mile 7, he was stumbling over rocks he couldn't see in the darkness. By mile 9, Ruth's breathing had gotten worse, each inhale a terrible wheeze that cut through the night air. Stay with me, little one, Calder murmured, holding her tighter. Just stay with me. We're almost there. He wasn't sure if he was talking to Ruth or to himself. Town appeared like a mirage. Lamplight in windows, the solid shapes of buildings against the night sky. Calder's legs nearly gave out with relief. He made it to Doc Henderson's house and pounded on the door with his fist, still cradling Ruth against his chest. The doctor appeared, took one look at Calder and the baby, and ushered them inside without a word. Marin was there. She'd been helping Mrs. Henderson with evening chores, and at the sound of the commotion she came running from the kitchen. Calder? What are you— Ruth? Her face went white. What happened? She's sick, coughing, wheezing, like before. Doc Henderson had already taken Ruth and was examining her with swift, practiced movements. Lung infection. Not as bad as the fever was, but it could get worse if we don't treat it. When did this start? This afternoon. And you walked 12 miles, in the dark, carrying her. It wasn't a question, but Calder nodded anyway. The doctor looked at him for a long moment, something like respect crossing his weathered face. All right, let's get her treated. Marin, I'll need hot water and clean cloths. Calder, sit down before you fall down. Calder's legs chose that moment to give out entirely. He collapsed into a chair, every muscle in his body screaming protest. Marin appeared beside him with water and a damp cloth. She pressed it to his forehead. When had he started sweating? And her hands were shaking. You could have died, she whispered. Walking in the dark like that. You could have fallen, gotten lost, frozen. She needed help. You could have waited until morning. Could you have? Calder met her eyes. If it was your child, and she is, isn't she? In every way that matters. Could you have waited and hoped she'd make it through the night? Marin's face crumpled. She pressed her forehead against his shoulder, her whole body trembling. No, she admitted. No, I couldn't have. Doc Henderson worked through the night, treating Ruth with steam inhalations and poultices while Calder and Marin kept vigil. By dawn, the baby's breathing had eased, and she was sleeping peacefully. She'll be fine, the doctor announced. Keep her warm, give her the medicine I'm leaving, and watch for signs of relapse. But she's strong. She'll pull through. Calder sagged with relief so profound it hurt. Mrs. Henderson insisted they stay for breakfast, a real breakfast with eggs and bacon and fresh bread. While they ate, Marin told Calder about her work, carefully avoiding his eyes. Mrs. Henderson pays fairly. The work isn't too hard. I've made $3 so far. $3 out of the 155 they still needed. The impossibility of their situation pressed down on Calder like a physical weight. They were fighting so hard, sacrificing so much, and it still wasn't enough. It would never be enough. As if reading his thoughts, Doc Henderson cleared his throat. Calder, I heard about your tax situation. Thomas Gentry's been bragging all over town about the Briggs property going to auction. Calder's jaw clenched. Let him brag. There's talk that he's planning to buy it himself, has investors lined up. What? Gentry's been wanting land in that area for years. Prime grazing, good water access. He's been waiting for you to fail. The doctor's expression was grim. I thought you should know what you're up against. So it wasn't even about the taxes. It was about Gentry wanting his land and using the county's authority to steal it legally. Rage flooded through Calder, hot and bitter. That bastard! Calder, Marin's hand found his under the table. No. He stood abruptly, nearly knocking over his chair. No, I'm done playing by rules that were designed to make me lose. If Gentry wants that land, he's going to have to fight me for it. What are you going to do? Doc Henderson asked. Whatever it takes. He stormed out of the house with Marin calling after him. He made it halfway down the street before his anger ran out and despair rushed in to fill the space. Who was he kidding? What could he do against a man with county authority and investor money? He was a broke rancher with nothing but debts and dependents. He was going to lose. And when he lost, he'd lose everything. The ranch, his home, and the family he'd somehow acquired without meaning to. Calder, stop! Marin caught up to him, Ruth bundled in her arms. Stop running and talk to me. There's nothing to talk about. His voice came out flat, defeated. We can't win this. I can't win this. Since when do you give up? I'm not giving up. I'm being realistic. Realistic? Marin's laugh was sharp. You walked 12 miles carrying my baby because she needed help. You sold your horse so we could eat. You've worked yourself half to death trying to earn enough to save your land. That's not realistic. That's stubborn and reckless and completely insane. Exactly my point. I'm insane for thinking any of this could work. No. She grabbed his arm, forcing him to look at her. You're insane for thinking you have to do it alone. We're in this together, remember? You and me. All of us. So stop trying to carry everything yourself and let me help. You are helping. I'm working for pennies while you destroy yourself trying to save a ranch that the county's determined to steal anyway. Her eyes flashed. There has to be another way. Something we're not seeing. Like what? I don't know, but two heads are better than one, so let's think. She shifted Ruth to her other hip. Gentry wants the land. He's using the tax debt to take it legally. What if we remove his justification? How? We can't pay the taxes. But what if we could prove corruption? If Gentry's planning to buy the land himself after seizing it for the county, that's a conflict of interest. Maybe illegal. Calder stared at her. You think we could prove that? Maybe. If we asked the right questions, talked to the right people. Marin's mind was clearly racing. Doc Henderson said Gentry's been talking about it. Who else has he talked to? Who else knows about his plans? Probably half the town. Then half the town could be witnesses. She grabbed his hand. Come on, we've got work to do. They spent the next 2 days questioning everyone who'd listen. The blacksmith remembered Gentry asking about property values in Calder's area. The banker recalled Gentry inquiring about auction procedures. The widow Patterson overheard him discussing investment opportunities with men from the territorial capital. Piece by piece, a pattern emerged. Gentry had been planning this for months, maybe longer. Using his position to identify vulnerable properties, waiting for owners to default, then swooping in to buy land at auction prices far below market value. Calder and Marin documented everything they learned, building a case that felt substantial but ultimately useless without proof. On the 6th day, salvation came from an unexpected source. Reverend Morrison appeared at the Henderson house while Marin was working. He asked to speak with her privately, and when they were alone, he pulled a ledger from his coat. I found this in the church records. Gentry donated it years ago, said it was old county documents we could use for scrap paper. The Reverend's hands shook slightly as he opened it. But it's not scrap. It's a record of properties he's acquired through tax sales. Over 30 parcels in the last 5 years, all bought at auction after he'd seized them as county agent. Marin's heart raced. This is proof. Proof of corruption. Yes, and I should have noticed it years ago. Should have questioned how one man could acquire so much land. Shame colored the Reverend's voice. I've failed in my duty to this community. Let me help you make it right. They brought the ledger to Doc Henderson, who brought it to the county sheriff. The sheriff, a decent man who'd always suspected Gentry of shady dealings but never had proof, promised to investigate. When Calder heard the news, he felt hope flare in his chest for the first time in weeks. This could work, he said, hardly daring to believe it. If the sheriff moves fast enough. It won't be fast enough. Marin's voice was quiet. The auction is in 8 days. Even if they prove corruption, the legal process could take months. Your land will still be seized. She was right, and Calder knew it. They'd found the smoking gun, but it wouldn't save them in time. That night, back at the ranch with all the children finally asleep, Calder and Marin sat together on the porch steps. The night was clear and cold, stars scattered across the sky like thrown diamonds. "I'm sorry," Calder said quietly. "I brought you here, promised you a home, and I'm going to lose it." "You didn't promise anything. You offered what you had, and we took it gratefully." Marin's shoulder pressed against his. "Whatever happens next, we'll face it together." "Where will you go when this place is sold?" "I don't know. West, maybe. Try to start over somewhere nobody knows us." The thought of her leaving, of the children scattered, of this fragile family torn apart, hurt more than losing the ranch. "Come with me," Calder heard himself say. Marin turned to look at him, her face half in shadow. "What?" "When they take the ranch. Don't go west alone. Come with me. Wherever I end up, whatever I do next, let's do it together." "Calder, you can't." "I can. I am." He took her hand, threading their fingers together. "I don't care if it makes sense. I don't care what people say. I care about you, about those kids, about this family we've made. And I'm not ready to let it go." Marin's eyes filled with tears. "You'd give up everything, your land, your home, your whole life here, just to stay with us?" "It's not giving up, it's choosing." His thumb brushed across her knuckles. "I'm choosing you, Marin, if you'll have me." For a long moment she just looked at him. Then she leaned forward and pressed her forehead against his, her breath warm on his face. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll have you. Whatever comes next, wherever we end up. Yes." They sat like that for a long time, holding each other in the darkness, drawing strength from proximity and shared determination. Inside the cabin, they could hear one of the children stirring, probably Stan, who had nightmares. Marin started to pull away, but Calder held her for one more moment. "We're going to be all right," he said, trying to believe it. "Somehow, we're going to be all right." The next morning brought disaster in a new form. Calder was in the barn when he heard the chickens screaming. He ran outside to find chaos. A pack of wild dogs had gotten into the coop and were tearing through his remaining livestock. Feathers flew. Blood spattered the dirt. By the time he drove them off with his rifle, the damage was done. Every chicken dead. The last of his breeding stock gone. Lydia stood in the doorway with the younger children behind her, all of them white-faced and shaking. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I forgot to latch the coop last night. This is my fault." "No." Calder's voice came out harsher than he intended. "It's not your fault. It's just—" He couldn't finish. Couldn't put into words the overwhelming sense of defeat that crashed over him. This was it, the final blow. Without the chickens, they had no eggs, no meat, no income at all. The last piece of his self-sufficiency destroyed. He sent Lydia inside and spent the next hour burying dead birds and trying not to scream at the sky. When Marin came home that evening, it was her day off. She found him sitting in the ruins of the chicken yard, covered in dirt and blood and feathers. She didn't say anything, just sat down beside him and took his hand. "I can't do this anymore," Calder said. His voice was hollow. "I can't keep fighting when everything I do fails, when every step forward gets knocked back twice as far." "Then stop fighting." Marin's voice was gentle. "Stop trying to win. Just survive. That's all we need to do. Survive until something changes." "And if nothing changes?" "Then we survive anyway." She squeezed his hand. "Together." That night, Calder made a decision. He was done with pride. Done with pretending he could handle this alone. Done with trying to be strong when he was breaking into pieces. The next morning, he took out Marin's husband's watch, the one she'd offered to sell weeks ago. The gold gleamed in the early light, and Calder felt the weight of what it represented. Her past, her memories, the last piece of the man she'd loved. He brought it to her before he could change his mind. "I need you to sell this," he said. Marin looked at the watch, then at him. "I thought you said—" "I know what I said, but I was wrong. We need the money more than we need pride or sentiment." His voice cracked. "Please, Marin, let me accept this from you. Let me accept your help the way you accepted mine." She took the watch with trembling hands, opened it. Inside was a photograph, a young man with kind eyes and Marin's smile. "His name was Daniel," she said softly. "He was a good man, a good father. He would have liked you, I think. I wish I could have known him." "So do I." She closed the watch with a soft click. "But he's gone, and you're here, and this—" She held up the watch. "This is just metal and memories. It can't keep my children warm or put food in their bellies or save the only home they've known in months." She pressed it into Calder's hand. "Take it, sell it, use it, and don't feel guilty about it. Daniel would want his children taken care of. This is how he can still do that." The gesture, the sacrifice, the trust, it broke something open in Calder's chest. He pulled Marin into his arms and held her while she cried for the husband she'd lost and the life she was finally letting go of. And when her tears stopped, he kissed her forehead and made her a promise. "We're going to survive this," he said. "Whatever it takes. However long it takes. We're going to survive." The watch sold for $75 to a jeweler 2 towns over, a man who recognized quality craftsmanship and didn't ask questions about why a rough-handed rancher was selling such a fine piece. Calder took the money and added it to what they'd scraped together from Marin's wages and his odd jobs. They counted it out on the kitchen table that night while the children slept, their hands touching as they stacked the bills and coins into careful piles. $118. They were still $137 short, with 4 days left until the auction. Marin's wedding ring went next, then her mother's silver brush, then Calder's father's pocket knife and his good Sunday suit. Each item sold felt like stripping away a piece of their souls, but they did it anyway because survival mattered more than sentiment. By the 3rd day, they had $162. Still $93 short. Calder was in town trying to sell his toolbox, the one his father had given him when he turned 16, each tool selected with care and love, when he ran into Pete Dawson outside the livery stable. "Heard you're selling everything that isn't nailed down," Pete said, his weathered face sympathetic. "Trying to save the ranch?" "Trying." Calder's voice was hoarse from exhaustion and defeat. "Not sure it's working." Pete was quiet for a moment, studying him. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a worn leather wallet. "How much you short?" "Too much." "Don't worry about it, Pete. You've done enough buying Sable." "I asked how much you're short." Calder's throat tightened. $93. Pete counted out bills with slow deliberation. When he finished, he held out $93 in cash. "Take it." Calder stared at the money like it might burn him. "I can't. Pete, that's your savings." "It's a loan. You can pay me back when you get on your feet again." Pete pressed the money into Calder's hand. "You're a good man, Briggs. What you did for that widow and her kids, that took courage. Figure the least I can do is help you keep a roof over their heads." "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll take care of those kids. That's payment enough." Pete clapped him on the shoulder. "Now get that money to Gentry before he finds a way to weasel out of his deadline." Calder rode Pete's borrowed horse straight to the county office, the money burning a hole in his pocket. His hands shook as he counted out $255 onto Thomas Gentry's desk. Gentry stared at the money like it had personally offended him. His face flushed red, then went pale, then settled into a tight mask of barely controlled rage. "You actually did it," he said slowly. "You actually scraped together the full amount. Every penny. Count it if you don't believe me." Gentry counted it anyway, taking his time, clearly hoping to find some discrepancy. When he finished, his jaw was clenched so tight Calder could hear his teeth grinding. "This clears your debt," Gentry admitted, pulling out a receipt book with obvious reluctance. "Property remains in your name. For now." "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means you're still a broke rancher with no income and a house full of dependents." Gentry's smile was vicious. "Next year's taxes will come due, and the year after that. How long do you think you can keep this up, Briggs?" How long before you're right back here begging for more time? As long as it takes. Calder snatched the receipt from Gentry's hand. And when the sheriff finishes investigating your little land buying scheme, you won't be in a position to collect anything from anybody. Gentry's face went white. I don't know what you're talking about. Sure you don't. 30 properties in 5 years, all seized for back taxes, all bought by you at auction. That's not a coincidence, that's corruption. Calder leaned forward. And when they prove it, I'm going to make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of man you are. He left before Gentry could respond, his heart pounding with victory and vindication and sheer relief so intense it made him dizzy. The ranch was safe. His home was safe. His family was safe. His family. The word settled in his chest like a key turning in a lock. That's what they were now, wasn't it? Not guests, not charity cases, not a temporary arrangement, family. He rode back to the ranch faster than was probably wise, desperate to tell Marin the news. She was in the garden with Lydia when he arrived, both of them on their knees in the dirt, planting seeds for a summer harvest they now had a chance to see. Marin looked up at the sound of hoofbeats, shading her eyes against the afternoon sun. Something in Calder's expression must have given him away because she scrambled to her feet, dirt flying. Did you? She started. Paid in full. The ranch is ours. The scream of joy that came out of Marin's mouth startled the chickens. The new chickens they'd managed to buy with money from her sewing work. She ran to him and Calder barely had time to dismount before she threw herself into his arms. He caught her and spun her around, both of them laughing like fools. Lydia was crying and smiling at the same time. The twins came running from the barn shouting questions. June toddled after them, not understanding but caught up in the excitement anyway. We did it, Marin gasped against Calder's chest. We actually did it. We did it, he agreed, holding her tight. Together. That night felt like celebration even though they had nothing special to mark it with. Dinner was simple, beans and cornbread, but they ate it like a feast. The children chattered and laughed, the weight of uncertainty finally lifted from their small shoulders. Even Ruth seemed to sense the change, cooing and smiling from her spot in Marin's lap. After the children were in bed, Calder and Marin sat together on the porch steps, watching the stars come out. The night was warm for early spring, carrying the scent of growing things and possibility. I can't believe it's over, Marin said softly. I keep waiting for something else to go wrong. Nothing's going to go wrong. Not tonight. Calder's arm was around her shoulders, and she fit against his side like she'd always belonged there. Tonight we just get to be grateful. I am grateful. For all of it. For you. She tilted her head to look up at him. You saved us, Calder. Again and again. I don't know how to ever repay it. Stop. He cupped her face with his free hand. Stop talking about repayment. Stop thinking of this as a debt. We're partners, Marin. Equals. What I did for you, you did for me right back. How? I've given you nothing but problems? You gave me a reason to live again. The words came out raw, honest. You and those kids, you brought light back into a house that was nothing but shadows. You made me remember what it felt like to hope. To care about something beyond just getting through another day. That's not nothing, Marin. That's everything. Her eyes filled with tears, catching starlight. Calder, I love you. He said it simply, without flourish, just a statement of fact as true as the ground beneath their feet. I don't know when it happened or how, but I love you. And I love those children, and I want... He took a shaky breath. I want this to be permanent. Not an arrangement, not charity. A real family. A real life together. Marin was crying openly now, tears streaming down her cheeks. You want to marry me? If you'll have me. I know I'm not much. A broke rancher with a falling-apart ranch and more debts than assets. You're everything. She pressed her hand over his mouth, stopping the words. You're kind and brave and stubborn and good. And yes. Yes, I'll marry you. I'll marry you tomorrow if you want. Calder kissed her then, soft and gentle, tasting salt from her tears and feeling like his chest might burst from the sheer size of what he felt. When they pulled apart, both of them were shaking. The town's going to talk, Marin warned, breathless. Let them talk. The church ladies will have opinions. They always do. People will say we're rushing into things. Marin, he took both her hands. Do you care what they say? She thought about it for a moment, then smiled, bright and fierce and free. No, not even a little bit. Then let's give them something to really talk about. They were married 3 days later in the county courthouse, with Doc Henderson and his wife as witnesses and all 5 children present. Marin wore a simple blue dress that Mrs. Henderson had helped her alter from one of her old ones. Calder wore his work clothes because he'd sold his good suit, but he'd scrubbed up and combed his hair back, and the way Marin looked at him made him feel like the richest man alive. The ceremony was short, just the legal vows and a signature in the county ledger. But when the judge pronounced them husband and wife, and Calder kissed his bride in front of their children and the 2 people who'd stood by them through everything, it felt more real and right than anything in his entire life. The twins cheered. Lydia cried happy tears. June clapped her hands without really understanding why, and Ruth gurgled contentedly in her mother's, in Marin's arms. Outside the courthouse, they found a crowd waiting. Calder's first instinct was to tense, ready for judgment and condemnation. But then he saw the faces. Pete Dawson, the blacksmith, the widow Patterson, Reverend Morrison, even some of the church ladies, though they looked slightly uncomfortable, and they were carrying things. Food baskets, blankets, a wooden cradle that the blacksmith had clearly made himself, a sack of seed potatoes, a laying hen in a crate. Pete stepped forward, hat in his hands. We heard you 2 were getting married today. Figured you could use some help getting started proper. We don't need charity, Calder started, old pride rearing its head. It's not charity, Pete interrupted firmly. It's what neighbors do for neighbors. What community does for its own. You've been through hell, Briggs, both of you. Figure it's past time we acted like decent people and helped out. Mrs. Hartley, of all people, cleared her throat. She looked deeply uncomfortable but determined. Mr. Briggs, Mrs. Briggs, I owe you an apology. Several, actually. I was quick to judge and slow to show Christian charity. That was wrong of me. I hope you'll accept this, she held out a beautiful quilted blanket, as a small attempt at making amends. Calder was stunned into silence. Marin's grip on his arm tightened. We accept, Marin said, her voice strong and clear. And we appreciate it more than you know. All of it. Thank you. One by one, the townspeople came forward with their gifts and their apologies and their awkward attempts at reconciliation. Not everyone, of course. Jeb Randall was notably absent, as was Thomas Gentry. But enough people. Enough to make Calder feel like maybe, just maybe, they had a place in this community after all. The children were overwhelmed by the attention and the presents. Stan and Bo kept running back and forth between the various gift givers, their eyes huge. Lydia accepted everything with grave politeness that made the adults smile. June hid in Calder's coat, peeking out occasionally to see what was happening. By the time they loaded everything into the borrowed wagon, Pete had insisted they take it for the day. They had enough supplies to stock the ranch for weeks. Food and blankets and tools and even a few toys for the children, whittled by the carpenter's apprentice. The ride home felt like a parade. The children sang songs in the back of the wagon, making up silly verses that had even Calder laughing. Marin sat beside him on the bench seat, her hand resting on his thigh, her face peaceful in a way he'd never seen before. Happy? He asked. Happier than I ever thought I'd be again. She leaned her head on his shoulder. Thank you for asking me to stay, for choosing us. Thank you for saying yes. When they reached the ranch, Calder pulled the wagon to a stop and just looked at it for a moment. The cabin he'd built with his own hands. The land he'd nearly lost. The life he'd almost given up on. It looked different now. Better. Like a home instead of a monument to grief. He climbed down and reached up to help Marin, but instead of setting her on her feet, he swept her up into his arms. Calder, she squeaked, startled. What are you doing? Carrying my wife over the threshold. He started toward the cabin. It's traditional. We've been living here for weeks, but we weren't married then. Now we are. So I'm doing this proper. Behind them, the children giggled and scrambled down from the wagon. Lydia helped the younger ones while Stan and Bo raced ahead to open the door. Calder carried Marin into the cabin and set her down gently just inside the doorway. She looked up at him with such love in her eyes it made his breath catch. "Welcome home, Mrs. Briggs," he said softly. "I've been home for weeks," she replied, reaching up to touch his face. "I just didn't know it until now." They kissed again, gentle and sweet, while the children cheered and clapped around them. That night, after all the gifts had been unloaded and put away, after the children had been fed and bathed and tucked into bed with stories and kisses, after the cabin had finally settled into peaceful quiet, Calder and Marin sat together at the kitchen table. It was the same table where they'd counted their desperate savings, where they'd laid out everything they had to sell, where they'd tried to do impossible math and make hopeless plans work. But tonight it was just a table in their home, with 2 cups of coffee and 2 people who'd chosen each other against all odds. "The children asked if they could call you Pa," Marin said quietly. "I told them to wait a bit longer, let things settle. But Calder, they already think of you that way. They have for weeks." "I know." Calder wrapped his hands around his coffee cup. "And I think of them as mine. All of them. Even Ruth, who will never remember a time when I wasn't her father." "Does that feel strange, taking on another man's children?" "No." He met her eyes. "It feels right. Daniel gave them life. I'm honored to help raise them. It's not replacing him. It's continuing what he started." Marin's smile was tremulous. He would have liked that. He always wanted a big family. "How big?" "At least 6 children," he used to say. She laughed softly. "We were working on it when he died. Ruth was a surprise. We didn't know I was pregnant until after the mine collapse. And now you have 5, almost to his goal." "Our goal now." Marin's hand found his across the table. "If you want more children, if you want to try, I want everything with you." Calder's voice was rough with emotion. "More children, if God wills it. Growing old together, watching these kids grow up and have families of their own. All of it. Even the hard parts?" "Especially the hard parts. We've proven we can handle those." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, just being together. Outside, an owl hooted. Inside, the fire crackled in the stove. Somewhere in the sleeping area, one of the children murmured something in their dreams. "I should check on them," Marin said, but she didn't move. "They're fine. Let's just sit here a minute longer." So they sat, holding hands across the table, 2 people who'd been broken and desperate and alone, who'd found each other at exactly the right moment and built something beautiful from the wreckage of their old lives. The next morning, Calder woke in his own bed for the first time in weeks. He'd been sleeping in the barn to give Marin and the children space, to avoid scandalizing the town any more than necessary. But now Marin was his wife, and this bed was theirs to share. She was still sleeping, curled on her side with one hand tucked under her cheek. In the early light, she looked younger, the worry lines around her eyes smoothed by rest. Calder watched her for a moment, still hardly believing this was real. He was married. He had a wife and 5 children. He had a family again. The thought should have terrified him. After losing Hannah and Marie, he'd been certain he'd never risk his heart like that again. But somehow, with Marin, it didn't feel like a risk. It felt like coming home after a long, cold journey. He slipped out of bed quietly, not wanting to wake her. In the main room, he found Lydia already up, tending to Ruth, who was fussing in her cradle. "Morning," Calder said softly. Lydia looked up and smiled. "Morning, Pa." The word hit him like a physical blow, in the best possible way. He'd wondered if he should correct her, remind her to keep calling him Calder for a while longer. But the natural way she said it, the trust and affection in her voice, made the word feel earned. "Morning, Lydia." He crossed to the cradle and looked down at Ruth. "She doing all right?" "Just wet. I was about to change her, but I'm not very good at it yet. Mama's better." "I'll give it a try." Calder picked up the baby, surprised by how natural the motion felt. He'd done this with Marie, but that felt like a lifetime ago. Ruth blinked up at him with solemn eyes, then broke into a gummy smile. "I think she knows," Lydia said, watching them. "That you're her pa now. She smiles more when you're around." "You think so?" "I know so." Lydia helped him find a clean diaper from the stack Marin kept near the bed. "We all do. Smile more, I mean, when you're here." Calder's throat tightened. He focused on changing Ruth's diaper, a task that took longer than it should have because his hands were clumsy with emotion, while Lydia chattered about her plans for the day. Mama said I could help her with the washing this morning, and this afternoon can I help you with the fence repair? I want to learn how to do it proper. Sure, we'll make a rancher out of you yet. Good. Lydia's expression turned serious. Because I want to help, want to earn my keep. Lydia, you don't have to. I want to. She met his eyes with that too-adult directness that always made his heart ache. You and Mama work so hard for us. I want to help however I can. I'm old enough. She was 8 years old. She shouldn't have to think about earning her keep or helping support the family. But Calder also understood pride, understood the need to contribute. So he nodded. All right, you can help with the fence this afternoon, but only if you promise to stop if you get tired. I promise. By the time Marin woke, the cabin was alive with activity. Lydia had started breakfast with Calder's help. The twins were outside feeding the chickens. June was playing with her new wooden doll. Ruth was clean and content in her cradle. Marin emerged from the bedroom looking rumpled and sleepy and more beautiful than Calder had ever seen her. You let me sleep, she accused, but she was smiling. You needed it. There's work to do. There's always work to do. It'll still be there after breakfast. He handed her a cup of coffee, made the way she liked it, strong with a little sugar. Sit. Relax. Let your family take care of you for once. The word family made her eyes shine. She sat at the table and watched her children move around the cabin with easy familiarity, and Calder watched her watching them, and felt his heart swell with a contentment he'd thought he'd never feel again. The days that followed settled into a new rhythm. Calder worked the ranch with renewed energy, no longer just maintaining it, but actually improving it. With Lydia's help, and sometimes the twins when they could focus long enough, he repaired fences, cleared new pasture, planted crops. The work was hard but satisfying, made better by knowing he was building something for his family. Marin transformed the cabin into a real home. Curtains appeared in the windows, sewn from fabric Mrs. Henderson had given them. The garden flourished under her care, promising vegetables by summer. She organized and cleaned and made everything warm and welcoming, humming while she worked. The children thrived. Stan and Bo put on weight and grew an inch seemingly overnight. They lost the haunted look they'd had when they first arrived, becoming the rambunctious, curious boys they were meant to be. June's vocabulary exploded as she felt safe enough to talk more, chattering constantly in her toddler way. Ruth grew stronger every day, her smiles coming more frequently. And Lydia, serious, responsible Lydia, slowly learned to be a child again. She still helped more than she needed to, still worried about things no 8-year-old should worry about. But Calder caught her playing with her siblings sometimes, heard her laugh at the twins' jokes, saw her relax in ways that spoke of healing. 2 weeks after the wedding, Calder was in the barn when he heard a wagon approaching. He stepped outside to find Sheriff Coleman climbing down from his horse, his expression grim. Calder's first thought was that something had gone wrong with the Gentry investigation. His second thought was worse, that someone had challenged the validity of his marriage to Marin or questioned his right to the children. Sheriff, he said warily, what can I do for you? Wanted to give you an update on the Gentry situation. Coleman pulled off his hat, wiping sweat from his forehead. We finished the investigation, found enough evidence of corruption to file charges. Gentry's been removed from his position and will face trial next month. Relief flooded through Calder. That's good news. It gets better. Every property he seized in the last 5 years is being reviewed. If we find evidence that he manipulated the process, those seizures will be invalidated. The original owners get their land back. Jesus. Calder leaned against the barn wall. How many people? At least 30 families. Maybe more. You did that, Briggs. You and your wife. If you hadn't come forward, if Reverend Morrison hadn't found that ledger, Gentry would still be stealing land and people would still be losing their homes. We just did what was right. Most people don't bother. They take care of their own problems and let everyone else fend for themselves. Coleman put his hat back on. You're a good man, Briggs. And for what it's worth, I'm glad you kept your ranch. It would have been a damn shame to see it go to that bastard. After the sheriff left, Calder stood in the yard for a long time, processing the news. They'd won. Not just their own battle, but a larger war against corruption and cruelty. They'd saved 30 families from Gentry's schemes. He thought about the man he'd been 6 weeks ago. Hollow, grieving, barely alive. That man could never have done this, could never have fought this hard or cared this much. But the man he'd become, the man Marin and her children had helped him become, that man could move mountains. Calder? Marin's voice pulled him from his thoughts. She was standing on the porch, shading her eyes against the afternoon sun. Is everything all right? I saw the sheriff leave. He walked to her, pulling her into his arms right there where anyone could see. Everything's perfect. Gentry's facing charges. People are getting their land back. We did it, Marin. We actually did it. She hugged him tight, her face pressed against his chest. We make a good team. The best team. He kissed the top of her head. What do you say we celebrate tonight? I'll ride into town, get something special for dinner, maybe that penny candy the kids like. You don't have to. I want to. Let me spoil our family a little. Our family? The words still felt new in his mouth, but they fit perfectly. That evening, they had a feast by their standards. Roasted chicken that Calder bought from the butcher, fresh bread still warm from the bakery, real butter, and a small bag of peppermint sticks for the children. They ate until they were full, laughing and talking. The cabin filled with warmth and light and love. After dinner, while Marin was putting the younger children to bed, Lydia approached Calder with something behind her back. Pa? She said shyly. Can I show you something? Of course. She pulled out a piece of paper covered in careful pencil drawings. I've been working on this. It's us. Our family. Calder took the paper with hands that trembled slightly. The drawing was simple but clear. A man and a woman standing in front of a cabin, surrounded by 5 children. Above them, she'd written in painstaking letters, "The Briggs family." Lydia, he managed, his voice thick. This is beautiful. Do you really like it? I wanted to get everyone right. That's you and Mama. And that's me. And the twins. I made Stan's hair a little curlier so you can tell them apart. And June and Ruth. I love it. He crouched down to her level. Can I keep it? Her face lit up. Really? You want to keep it? I want to frame it. Hang it on the wall where everyone can see it. Lydia threw her arms around his neck, nearly knocking him over. I love you, Pa. It was the first time any of the children had said it directly. The words hit Calder like a lightning strike, filling him with joy so intense it hurt. I love you too, sweetheart, he whispered into her hair. So much. That night, lying in bed with Marin curled against his side, Calder thought about the journey that had brought them here. The knock on his door before dawn, the desperate widow with 5 starving children, the impossible choices and desperate gambles and moments when everything seemed lost. And somehow, impossibly, they'd made it through. Not just survived, but thrived, built a family from broken pieces, made a home from desperation and hope. What are you thinking about? Marin murmured sleepily. About how lucky I am. About how my life was over 6 weeks ago, and now it's just beginning. She propped herself up on one elbow, looking down at him in the darkness. You saved us, Calder. Don't ever forget that. We saved each other. He pulled her down for a kiss. That's what family does. Outside, the Montana night was peaceful and quiet. Inside, a man and a woman lay together, surrounded by sleeping children, and felt like the richest people in the world. Because they were. Not in money or possessions, but in love and loyalty and the fierce determination to protect what they'd built. And that, Calder thought, as sleep finally claimed him, was worth more than all the gold in the territory. Spring came to Montana with a gentleness that felt like forgiveness. The hard ground softened under warm rain. Green shoots pushed through the earth in Marin's garden. The cattle grew fat on new grass, and the chickens, the new flock that had replaced the ones lost to wild dogs, laid eggs with enthusiastic regularity. Calder woke each morning to sounds he'd thought he'd never hear again. Children's laughter. His wife humming while she made breakfast. The ordinary chaos of a family coming to life with the sun. It had been 2 months since the wedding, and he still sometimes caught himself waiting for disaster, waiting for the other shoe to drop, waiting for someone to tell him this happiness wasn't real, wasn't earned, wasn't meant for him. But disaster didn't come. What came instead was normalcy, beautiful, mundane, precious normalcy. On a bright morning in late April, Calder was repairing the porch steps when he heard a wagon approaching. He looked up to see Doc Henderson driving up the path, Mrs. Henderson beside him on the bench seat. "Doc," Calder called, wiping his hands on his work pants. "Something wrong?" "Quite the opposite." Doc Henderson climbed down with a smile. "We brought news, and a visitor." From the back of the wagon emerged a thin man in his 50s, weathered and worn, but with kind eyes. He looked vaguely familiar, though Calder couldn't place him. Marin came out of the cabin, wiping flour from her hands. She took one look at the stranger and went completely still. "Reverend Paulson?" Her voice was barely a whisper. The man's face broke into a wide smile. "Marin Calhoun. Lord, girl, I've been looking for you for months. I don't understand. You moved east. Everyone said, I did move east, but I came back. Had some business to settle, and when I heard you were in these parts..." He pulled a leather satchel from the wagon. "I brought something you need." Marin's eyes flew to her mouth. "You didn't." "I did." Reverend Paulson opened the satchel and pulled out a worn ledger. "Marriage records from my time in the Silver Valley Territory, including yours and Daniel's, dated June 14, 1866. Official, legal, and properly witnessed." The silence that followed was so complete Calder could hear his own heartbeat. "How?" Marin finally managed. "I thought the fire." "The church burned, yes, but I always kept duplicate records at home. Couldn't stand the thought of losing people's important documents to accident or disaster." The Reverend's expression turned gentle. "When I heard through Doc Henderson that you'd been denied widow's benefits for lack of proof, I knew I had what you needed. Took me a few weeks to dig through my old records, but here it is, proof of your marriage to Daniel Calhoun." Marin's legs gave out. Calder caught her before she hit the ground, supporting her weight as she stared at the ledger like it was made of gold and dreams. "This means," she started. "It means you can file for widow's benefits," Doc Henderson finished. "Territorial relief funds for the children. It's not a fortune, but it's something. Maybe $30 a month." $30 a month. Enough to ease the constant financial pressure. Enough to buy seed and supplies without selling treasured possessions. Enough to breathe. "I don't know what to say," Marin whispered. "Say you'll accept it," Reverend Paulson replied. "And say you'll forgive an old preacher for not coming forward sooner. I should have thought to check my records months ago." "There's nothing to forgive. You've given me us." Marin looked at Calder, tears streaming down her face. "You've given us a future." Mrs. Henderson produced a handkerchief, which Marin accepted gratefully. The children had emerged from the cabin, drawn by the commotion. They gathered around their mother with worried faces until she reassured them through her tears that everything was fine, better than fine. "There's one more thing," Doc Henderson said, pulling an envelope from his coat. "Collection from the church. After Gentry's arrest, people felt bad about how they'd treated you both. Wanted to help make amends." He handed the envelope to Calder, who opened it with shaking hands. Inside was $147 in cash and a note signed by over 30 townspeople. "To the Briggs family, in gratitude for your courage and in apology for our lack of charity. May this help build the future you deserve." Calder couldn't speak. He just stood there holding money he'd never expected, surrounded by people he'd thought had abandoned him, and felt something break open in his chest. "I don't..." His voice cracked. "This is too much." "It's not nearly enough," Mrs. Hartley said, stepping forward from where she'd been waiting by the wagon. Calder hadn't even noticed her there. "Mr. Briggs, Mrs. Briggs, I owe you both a profound apology. I was cruel and judgmental when I should have been compassionate. I let gossip and propriety matter more than Christian charity. I'm deeply ashamed." She held out a basket covered with a checkered cloth. "It's not much, just some preserves and baked goods. But I wanted you to know that some of us are trying to do better. To be better." Marin took the basket with trembling hands. "Thank you, Mrs. Hartley. That means more than you know." Other wagons were arriving now, the blacksmith with tools he'd forged especially for Calder's work, the widow Patterson with a quilt she'd made for the children, Pete Dawson with a young mare, not sable, but a good horse nonetheless. "Consider her a gift," Pete said when Calder tried to refuse, "or a loan if that sits better with your pride. Either way, you need transportation, and I've got more horses than I can use. Take her." The generosity was overwhelming. One by one, townspeople came forward with gifts and apologies and offers of help. Not everyone. Jeb Randall was notably absent, and a few of the stuffier church members stayed away. But enough. More than enough. By noon, the yard was full of people, and the cabin was bursting with supplies. The children were running wild with excitement, playing with new toys and showing off their home to curious visitors. Marin was surrounded by church ladies who were teaching her a complicated quilting pattern and apologizing for their previous coldness. Calder was deep in conversation with several ranchers about cooperative cattle breeding and shared equipment use. It felt like a party, like a celebration, like the community welcoming them home after a long exile. "Quite a change from a few months ago," Doc Henderson observed, appearing at Calder's elbow with a cup of coffee. "I still can't quite believe it's real." "It's real. People just needed a reminder of what's important. You and Marin gave them that." The doctor smiled. "Sometimes it takes seeing real courage to shame us into finding our own." As the afternoon wore on and visitors began to leave, Calder found himself standing with Reverend Paulson by the garden fence. The old preacher was admiring Marin's neat rows of seedlings with an appreciative eye. "She always did have a gift for growing things," Paulson said. "Even when she and Daniel were struggling, their garden flourished. She has a way of nurturing life." "She does." Calder watched Marin through the window, saw her laughing at something Mrs. Henderson said. "Reverend, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Did you know Daniel well?" Paulson nodded slowly. "Well enough. He was a good man, honest, hardworking, devoted to his family. The mine collapse that took him, it shouldn't have happened. Safety violations that the company ignored. Daniel and 12 other men died because someone decided profit mattered more than lives." Calder's jaw tightened. "Marin doesn't talk about it much. I imagine it's too painful. She loved him deeply." Paulson looked at Calder with penetrating kindness. "But love isn't finite, son. The heart doesn't run out. She can love Daniel's memory and love you too. One doesn't diminish the other." "I know, sometimes I wonder if I'm enough, if I can be what she and those kids need." "You already are. You proved that when you opened your door to a desperate stranger, when you fought to keep your home so you could give them one, when you chose love over fear." Paulson clapped him on the shoulder. "Daniel would be grateful, I think, knowing his children are safe and loved, that his wife found happiness again. That's all any of us can hope for, that the people we love survive our loss and find joy again." The word settled something in Calder that he hadn't known was unsettled. He'd been carrying guilt without naming it, guilt for loving Marin, for stepping into Daniel's place, for being alive when a good man was dead. But maybe it wasn't about replacement. Maybe it was about continuation, about honoring what Daniel started by protecting and loving what he'd left behind. That evening, after the last visitors had departed and the children were in bed, Calder and Marin sat together counting money and making plans. The widow's benefits would start next month. The community's gift gave them a cushion they'd never had before. Combined with Calder's work and Marin's occasional sewing jobs, they'd actually have enough. Not just to survive, but to build something sustainable. "We could expand the cattle herd," Calder mused. "Or add sheep. The grazing land could support both. Or we could save it," Marin countered. "Build up a reserve so the next time something goes wrong, we're not desperate." "When did you become the practical one?" "When I watched you sell everything you owned to save us." She squeezed his hand. "I'm not letting us get that desperate again. We're building security now, real security." They made lists and plans late into the night, dreaming aloud about possibilities that had seemed impossible just months ago. A new barn, more livestock, maybe even hiring help during harvest season so Calder wouldn't have to work himself to exhaustion. "What about school for the children?" Marin asked suddenly. "Lydia's smart. She should have proper education. And the twins, they need to learn to read better." "Town's 12 miles away. Too far for daily travel. Then maybe we start our own school. Here, for our kids and any neighbor children who want to come. I could teach. I'm not formally educated, but I can read and write and do figures well enough." Calder looked at his wife, at the determination in her eyes, the dreams she was building, and felt his heart swell with pride. "You'd be a wonderful teacher." "You think so?" "I know so. You've already taught the children so much: kindness, resilience, hope. Reading and writing would just be extra." She smiled and kissed him softly. "We're going to be all right, aren't we? Really all right." "We already are." The weeks that followed were filled with hard work and small joys. Calder repaired the barn and built new stalls. Marin started her informal school, teaching Lydia and the twins their letters and numbers each morning before chores. 2 neighbor families heard about it and asked if their children could join, and suddenly Marin was teaching 7 students in the cabin's main room. The widow's benefits arrived, $32, slightly more than expected. Marin cried when she saw the official letter from the territorial office, this time acknowledging her legal status as Daniel Calhoun's widow and her children's right to support. "It's not about the money," she told Calder through her tears. "It's about being recognized, about the territory acknowledging that Daniel existed, that our marriage was real, that these children deserve support. It's about dignity." Calder understood. It was the same feeling he'd had when the townspeople apologized, not about the gifts, but about being seen and valued as a person rather than dismissed as a problem. In early May, Marin started feeling sick in the mornings. At first, she attributed it to bad food or a passing illness, but when it continued for a week, Doc Henderson's wife took her aside during a visit. "How long since your last monthly?" Mrs. Henderson asked gently. Marin counted back and went pale. 8 weeks, maybe 9, but I thought, with all the stress, I assumed. Stress can delay things, but combined with morning sickness? Mrs. Henderson smiled. "My dear, I think you're expecting." The news hit Marin like a lightning bolt. She'd had 5 children already. She knew what pregnancy felt like, but somehow, with everything else happening, she hadn't let herself consider the possibility. She told Calder that night after the children were asleep. His reaction was everything she could have hoped for: shock, then joy, then tender concern. "Are you happy about it?" he asked, his hand resting on her still flat stomach. "Terrified," she admitted. "But yes, happy. Are you?" His voice broke. "I never thought I'd have this again, a child of my own, a family. I thought that part of my life was over. And now? Now I'm the luckiest man alive." He pulled her close, holding her like she was made of precious glass. "A baby. Our baby." They sat together in the quiet cabin, hands clasped, and dreamed about the future growing inside Marin. Boy or girl, it didn't matter. Healthy. That's all they wanted. Healthy and loved and raised with siblings and stability. The children found out 2 weeks later when June innocently asked why Mama was getting fat. Marin laughed and gathered them all together to explain that they'd be getting a new brother or sister. The reactions varied wildly. Lydia was excited and immediately started planning how she'd help with the baby. The twins were indifferent. Babies were boring, they proclaimed. And could they please go play now? June was fascinated and wanted to know where exactly the baby was hiding. Ruth, who was only 9 months old herself, just gurgled and grabbed her toes, oblivious. That night, Stan, or maybe Bo, Calder still had trouble telling them apart in dim light, crept out of bed and approached Calder where he sat mending a harness. "Pa?" the boy whispered. "Yeah, son?" "When the new baby comes, will you still love us, all of us? Or will you love the baby more because it's really yours?" The question broke Calder's heart. He set down the harness and pulled the boy into his lap, a tight fit now that he was getting bigger, but they managed. "Listen to me. All of you are really mine. Every single one. Ruth and June and you and your brother and Lydia. You became mine the day your mama knocked on my door. The new baby isn't going to change that. Promise?" "I promise. Cross my heart." Calder suited action to words. "Being a father isn't just about blood. It's about showing up, about loving and protecting and teaching, and I'm going to do that for all of you, always, understand?" The boy nodded and burrowed deeper into Calder's arms. "I love you, Pa. I love you too, son. So much." Summer arrived in full force, turning the Montana landscape golden and green. The garden flourished beyond Marine's wildest hopes, producing more vegetables than they could eat. She started preserving and canning, filling the cellar shelves with jars of beans and tomatoes and pickles. The children helped, even the twins, who were learning that good behavior earned privileges like fishing trips with Pa. The cattle herd grew with spring calves. The chickens multiplied. The new mare, they'd named her Dancer for her light-footed gait, proved to be an excellent worker and gentle enough for the children to pet. The ranch was thriving. The family was thriving. And for the first time in years, Calder went to bed each night, not just grateful to have survived another day, but genuinely happy to be alive. In July, Thomas Gentry went on trial for corruption and abuse of office. Calder and Marin attended, sitting in the packed courtroom alongside 30 other families Gentry had victimized. The evidence was overwhelming. The ledger Reverend Morrison had found, testimony from victims, bank records showing suspicious property transfers. Gentry was convicted on all counts, sentenced to 5 years in prison, and ordered to pay restitution to everyone he'd defrauded. The courtroom erupted in cheers and tears. Outside afterward, people clustered in groups, talking and crying and celebrating. A man Calder didn't know approached him with outstretched hand. "Samuel Wright, Gentry seized my ranch 3 years ago. I've been working as a hired hand ever since, trying to earn enough to start over. Because of you, because of what you exposed, I'm getting my land back, my home, my life." His voice shook. "I can't ever repay you for that. You don't need to repay me. Just do the same for someone else someday. That's how we build a real community." Similar conversations happened a dozen times that afternoon, people thanking them, crying, sharing their own stories of loss and hope and restoration. By the time Calder and Marin climbed into the wagon to head home, they were emotionally exhausted but deeply satisfied. "We did something good," Marin said as they drove through the golden afternoon light. "Really, truly good. We changed people's lives. We just told the truth. That's all it takes sometimes. The truth and the courage to speak it." She leaned against his shoulder. "I'm proud of us, of what we've built and who we've become." "Me too." As summer ripened into early autumn, Marin's pregnancy became obvious. Her belly swelled with new life, and she moved through the cabin with one hand pressed to her back and the other resting on the growing child. The children were fascinated, taking turns feeling the baby kick and arguing about names. "If it's a girl, we should call her Marie," Lydia suggested one evening at dinner, after Pa's first daughter, so she's remembered. Calder's breath caught. He looked at Marin, who had tears in her eyes. "And if it's a boy," Lydia continued, oblivious to the emotional bomb she'd just dropped, "we could call him Daniel, after our first Pa, so he's remembered too." The silence around the table was profound. Then Marin reached across and took Calder's hand. "I think those are beautiful names," she said softly. "Honoring the people we've lost, keeping their memory alive. What do you think, Calder?" What did he think? He thought his heart might burst from the fullness of it. He thought these children were wiser and kinder than most adults. He thought the family they'd built was something precious and rare and worth every moment of struggle it had taken to create. "I think," he managed, his voice rough, "that Marie or Daniel would be perfect names." The children cheered and the conversation moved on to other things. But later, when the cabin was quiet and Marine was drowsing against his shoulder, Calder thought about names and memory and legacy. Hannah and Marie would never be forgotten. Daniel would always be part of this family's story. But the new life growing inside Marin, that was the future. A future built on the foundation of the past, but not trapped by it. A future full of possibility. In late September, as the aspen trees turned gold and the air took on a crisp edge, Marin went into labor. It started in the early morning, familiar pains that she recognized immediately after 5 previous births. "It's time," she told Calder calmly. "Send for Mrs. Henderson." Calder, who'd faced down wild animals and corrupt officials without flinching, went pale. "Now? Already? Are you sure?" "Calder, I've done this 5 times. I'm sure." She grabbed his hand as a contraction hit. "Go! Quickly!" He rode Dancer into town at a gallop that probably wasn't good for either of them, returning within 2 hours with Mrs. Henderson and Doc Henderson both. By then, Marin's contractions were coming hard and fast. Mrs. Henderson took over with calm efficiency, sending Calder and the children out of the cabin. "This is women's work. Go occupy yourselves elsewhere." Calder paced the yard like a caged animal while Lydia tried to keep the younger children distracted. The twins wanted to know why Mama was making those noises. June was crying because she could sense something was wrong. Ruth needed feeding but wouldn't take a bottle from anyone but Marin. It was the longest afternoon of Calder's life. Just before sunset, a baby's cry split the air. Strong, healthy, indignant at being thrust into the world. Calder's legs went weak with relief. Mrs. Henderson appeared in the doorway, smiling. "You have a son, Mr. Briggs, and your wife did beautifully. Come meet him." The children rushed inside ahead of Calder, crowding around the bed where Marin lay propped on pillows, exhausted but radiant. In her arms was a tiny red-faced baby with a shock of dark hair. "Daniel," Marin said, looking up at Calder with love shining in her eyes. "Daniel Calder Briggs, after both his fathers." Calder crossed the room on shaking legs and looked down at his son. His son. The baby had Marin's nose and chin, but Calder's dark coloring. He was perfect. Absolutely perfect. "Can I hold him?" Calder whispered. Marin placed the baby in his arms, and Calder felt something shift in his chest. This was his child, his blood, his legacy, his future. But looking around at the other 5 children crowding close, all of them eager to see their new brother, Calder realized they were all his children, all his legacy, all his future. Blood didn't make a family. Love did. Commitment did. Showing up every day and choosing each other over and over again. That's what made a family. "He's beautiful," Lydia breathed, touching one tiny fist with gentle reverence. "Can I help take care of him?" "We all will," Marin said. "All of us together. That's what families do." That night, after Doc and Mrs. Henderson had left with promises to check in tomorrow, after the children had been fed and settled and reassured that Mama was fine and the baby was fine and everything was wonderful, Calder sat in the rocking chair with his son in his arms. The cabin was peaceful. Marin was sleeping, exhausted from labor. The children were curled in their beds. Outside, the Montana night was cool and clear, stars scattered across the sky in impossible profusion. Calder looked down at Daniel's sleeping face and thought about the journey that had brought them here. 6 months ago, he'd been alone and broken, barely alive. 6 months ago, a desperate widow had knocked on his door with 5 starving children and changed everything. He thought about all the moments that could have gone differently. If he'd turned them away, if Marin had given up and moved on, if the town had never forgiven them, if Gentry had won, if any of 100 things had gone wrong instead of right. But they hadn't gone wrong. Against all odds, through desperation and determination and grace, they'd built something beautiful from the wreckage of their old lives. The door to the bedroom opened quietly. Marin emerged, moving slowly, and came to stand beside the rocking chair. She rested her hand on Calder's shoulder, and together they looked down at their son. "Are you happy?" she asked softly. "Happier than I ever thought possible," Calder admitted. "I thought my life was over when Hannah and Marie died. Thought I'd never feel anything but grief and emptiness. But then you knocked on my door and brought light back into the darkness. You saved us, Calder. You gave us everything." "No." He looked up at her. "We saved each other. You and those kids. You reminded me what it was to be human, to hope, to love. Without you, I was just a ghost waiting to die. You brought me back to life." Marin's eyes filled with tears. "I love you so much. I know it's different from what I felt for Daniel, but it's real and it's deep, and I know. And I love you. Different from what I felt for Hannah, but just as real, just as deep." He stood carefully, still cradling Daniel, and kissed her. "We're allowed to love again, Marin. We're allowed to be happy. The people we lost, they'd want that for us. I know, sometimes I feel guilty for being this happy. Don't ever feel guilty for surviving and thriving and building a new life. That's not betrayal. That's honoring their memory by living fully." He kissed her again. "Now go back to bed before you fall over. You just had a baby. You need rest." She smiled and obeyed, pausing at the bedroom door to look back at him. "Thank you, Calder, for everything. For choosing us. For loving us. for being the man you are." After she disappeared into the bedroom, Calder continued rocking, his son warm against his chest. Through the window, he could see the first hints of dawn touching the eastern sky. A new day, a new season, a new life in every sense of the word. The ranch that had nearly been lost was thriving. The family that had been cobbled together from desperate circumstances was stronger than blood. The future that had seemed impossible was unfolding in his arms. June appeared in the doorway, thumb in her mouth, dragging her blanket. "Pa, can't sleep." "Come here, sweetheart." Calder shifted Daniel to one arm and held out the other. June climbed into his lap, curling against his chest. Within moments, she was asleep again, breathing soft and steady. One by one, the other children appeared. Lydia first, then the twins, then Ruth toddling over on uncertain legs. They clustered around the rocking chair, some sitting on the floor, some leaning against Calder's legs, all of them drawn by the magnetic pull of family. "Tell us a story, Pa," Stan, or was it Bo, requested sleepily. "What kind of story?" "The one about how Mama came here, about the morning she knocked on the door." Calder looked down at his children, all of them his, every single one, and felt his throat tighten with emotion. "All right," he said softly. "It was a cold morning in March. I was alone in my cabin, and I heard a knock." He told them the story as the sun rose over the Montana plains, told them about their mother's courage and their own resilience, about desperate gambles and impossible odds, about a community that learned to care and a family that chose each other against the world's expectations. By the time he finished, full daylight was streaming through the windows. Maureen had emerged from the bedroom, drawn by the sound of his voice. She stood in the doorway with her hand pressed over her heart, tears streaming down her face. "Did the man in the story get his happy ending?" June asked, her voice drowsy. Calder looked at Marin, at the children surrounding him, at the baby in his arms and the home they'd built, and the future stretching out before them like an unwritten book. "He didn't just get an ending," Calder said, his voice thick with emotion. "He got a family. He got a second chance at life. He got everything he'd thought he'd lost, and more than he'd ever dreamed of having. So yes, sweetheart, he got his happy ending. We all did." Outside, the morning continued its golden arrival. Chickens clucked in their coop. Cattle lowed in the pasture. Somewhere in the distance, a meadowlark sang its bright cascading song. Inside the cabin, a family sat together in the early light. Broken pieces made whole, desperate strangers become beloved kin. Two wounded souls healed by the simple act of choosing love over fear. Calder Briggs looked around at everything he'd nearly lost and everything he'd gained, and knew with bone-deep certainty that this was exactly where he was meant to be. Not in spite of the journey that had brought them here, but because of it. Every struggle, every sacrifice, every moment of doubt and fear, it had all led to this. To a house full of laughter and love. To a wife who'd walked through fire and come out stronger. To children who'd learned that family wasn't about blood, but about showing up, day after day, and choosing each other. To a second chance he'd never thought he'd get, and a future worth fighting for. "I love you all," he said quietly, and 6 voices answered in unison. "We love you too, Pa." And in that moment, in that cabin on the Montana plains, with morning light streaming through the windows and his family surrounding him, Calder Briggs understood what true wealth was. Not money or property or possessions, but this. People who loved you, people who needed you, and who you needed in return. People who made life worth living. He'd started the year as a ghost in an empty house, and he was ending it as a father, a husband, a man with purpose and joy and hope for tomorrow. The widow had said, "Take my children," and he'd answered, "I'll take you too." It was the best decision he'd ever made, the decision that saved them all. Outside, the sun climbed higher, burning off the last of the morning mist. Inside, a family began their day together, ordinary, miraculous, and complete. The story that had started with a desperate knock on a door before dawn had become something beautiful, something lasting, something that would echo through generations as Daniel and his siblings grew up and told their own children about the morning their mother found refuge and their father found redemption. But for now, in this perfect moment, it was enough to simply be together, To sit in the quiet cabin and feel grateful for second chances and new beginnings and the extraordinary gift of ordinary love. Calder rocked his children in the morning light, his heart full to overflowing, and knew that this, right here, right now, was everything he'd ever need. This was home. This was family. This was love. And it was enough. More than enough. It was everything.